Today we're talking about the ancient Egyptian palaces. We're talking about the fates of the kings, and probably some historical injustice is that when we look at the past centuries, the brilliant history of ancient Egypt, then about their life, their fates, about what happened at that time, we judge by the inscriptions on the walls of the tombs and by the reliefs on the walls of the temples. And of course, we often have a question, how did they live? Where were the king's residences? Where in the end did those events in the life of our beloved historical characters take place, which were so well known to us either by text or by a separate written source that has been preserved? That is why the conversation about the king's palaces is extremely important, because behind the great pyramids and behind the majesty of the king's tombs, there are unique archaeological documents and unique evidence, monuments of material culture, which allow us to imagine in detail how the great king's residence looked like in different eras. They, in fact, went into the shadows. And when we talk about ancient Egypt, this is the first association naturally. You have the monuments of the deceased, and only then we are literally like a mosaic, like such an incredibly fantastic performance of a precious vessel, broken into fragments. We will, piece by piece, connect this world in order to imagine the floors on which the kings walked, in order to imagine what the great king's residence looked like, in order to imagine all the space in which all the most important events in ancient Egyptian history took place. And here, looking out into these palaces, there will be quite a lot of residents today, and I will show you both authentic archaeological monuments and unique European reconstructions. I think that the image of the palace today will be extremely bright. Behind the clouds of peace and harmony, behind the floors, which at times were made of gold and silver, behind the noise of upholstered clothes of court ladies and gallant cavaliers, there were not only such incredible stories of luxury, but also kings who were killed during conspiracies and dynasties that went into non-existence during complex coups. All this was combined into a single complex, which in ancient Egyptian language was called This is how the palace was called. This word combines on the one hand the idea of an administrative residence, and on the other hand it also has a sacred status. And here, of course, we rely on the idea that the king for ancient Egyptians is a creature of dual nature. This is a great intermediary between the earthly world and the heavenly world, which, being a human being in its original nature at the moment of intronation, receives a second divine nature, which makes it such, makes it an exception, makes it a connecting link that unites on the one hand the world of the living Egyptians, and on the other hand the world of the gods and the world of the ancestors. This high status, which is reflected even in the name of the palace, did not interfere with the court ladies or some parties that dominated the court in one way or another, overthrowing the kings, pursuing some of their own plans. Another name for the palace in ancient Egyptian language, it is actually well known to you. This is Pera. This is the great house. This is the very name that later, through the Hebrew text, transformed the word Pharaoh, and from there entered the European languages. Imagine His Majesty rising to His son, the ruler of all things, and proclaiming, I see how God understand my words, and your kingdom over all the earth will be successful, and you will multiply the happiness of the country. Beware of the worm, so that no unforeseen may happen to you. Do not approach it alone. Do not trust even your brother. Do not know even your friend. Do not approach anyone without need. Take care of your life even in the hour of sleep. For there is no faithful servant on the day of misfortune. I served the poor. I exalted the little one. I was available to the possessor as to the possessor. But the one who ate my bread raised his hand on me, the one to whom I stretched my evil and my plot against me. Luck does not coincide with the one who does not know what he should know. And so it happened after dinner, when the night came and the hour of inspiration from care came. I lay down in bed and my tired heart was plunged into sleep, and suddenly there was a rumble of weapons and they called my name. Then I became like a snake looking for the earth in the desert, and instantly I woke up and saw that my comrades in arms were fighting and I was alone, and I realized that my warriors were fighting among themselves. If I had immediately grabbed the weapon of my right-hand man, I would have turned to him with a spear. But there is no power of the awakened one at night. Not a lonely fighter, I know. I will not be a defender of my luck without you. Look, trouble has come to my unconscious. Before I informed the court that I appointed you as my companion, before I raised you to the throne with me, and I was just thinking about our joint rule, for I was not prepared for what happened. I did not foresee this. My heart did not know that my guard would tremble. Did the women really instigate a revolt? Did they really plan a confusion in the palace chambers? I raised the palace and decorated it with gold. The ceiling is made of lapis lazuli, the walls are made of silver, the floor is made of sacred camphor, the gates are made of copper, the fences are made of bronze. But the palace cells started a riot against me. Be ready for this, for you know that now you are the Lord of everything. Of course, there are many people behind the walls of the palace. The wise one says yes, the fool says no, because he does not know that my tongue is you, my son, my heart, my son. When I still walked on my feet and my eyes saw you, you were my heart. You were born in a good hour for people, and they praise you. Look, I put an end to it. You will complete my business to the end. My bark, the kingdom of the departed, has come to an end. You will put on your head a white veneer of the resurrection of God. All the seals are in their places, and there is a feast in honor of your Lord. Your kingdom has come. It means you're still with me. It will not become as mine. A fragment of the famous reception of the Pharaoh Amenemhet I, who was killed as a result of the palace conspiracy. The son of Amenemhet, the future ruler of Cilicia I, at this time is far from the palace, and from other sources we know that he is running to the capital in order to take the throne of the killed father and become a king. In the famous literary work, Amenemhet I is the risen son in the form of a ghost who tells about what happened in the palace chambers. In the history of ancient Egypt, this happened unambiguously and quite often. Moreover, the king was threatened not only with death, and not only with human oblivion, but even with the oblivion of monuments, and sometimes the oblivion of palaces. The amazing Sphinx, which lost its face due to the salty groundwater, today stands in one of the main halls of the Egyptian Museum of the University of Pennsylvania. It was found in the palace of the Pharaoh Nebuchadnezzar, which he ruled in the 13th century BC. The monument itself, already at that time, has a history of 700 years, and once risen, most likely either Amenemhet the first or his son, those kings about whom the text of the conspiracy speaks. He was the first of many generations of other kings. The monument remained the same, the names changed, the history changed, and the king, on the one hand, who was not just the heir to the world of the gods on earth, but the earthly embodiment of the god Horus, the great predestined prince of the kingdom, had to not only protect the country, not only do everything so that his monuments remain for centuries and glorify his reign, but also do everything possible to survive in the walls of the palace. What did this palace look like? Despite the fact that, of course, architectural forms have changed over the millennia of the history of ancient Egypt, some aspects of the palace construction have remained unchanged. And my first frame is associated with the late complex of the first Egyptian pyramid, the pyramid of the king Nebuchadnezzar, which in a later Egyptian tradition was called Djoser, the holy ancestor. In the right part of the frame, you can see the concave and hexagonal first Egyptian pyramid, but it is not it that attracts our attention today. The entire royal pre-pyramid complex is surrounded by a huge 10-metre wall that consists of convex facades that intersect with the recessed structures of the wall niches. This facade, which traditionally in Egyptian art and Egyptian architecture was associated with the facade of the palace. Here, the fence of the royal pyramid complex on the one hand reminds of the great Inbu hedge, the famous serpentine structure of the ancient Memphis, which at that time was the capital of the Egyptian state. And on the other hand, it imitates the palace, once the residence of the living king, in order to imagine that there is a great earthly and heavenly throne from which the king must go to heaven. In fact, this ornament, this way of decorating the vertical space that we call the royal palace facade, is seen here so monumental that we can quite imagine looking at this frame entering the royal residence. But this style of decoration is found not only on monuments of architecture, but also on the oldest imaginative evidence of Egyptian history. Now in front of you is the late stele of the King Horajet. This is the first dynasty of the 30th century BC. The monument is kept in Louvre, and if you look carefully at what is depicted, then you will see the great heavenly golden falcon, the symbol of the kingdom, which sits on this rectangle, which actually symbolically denotes the palace room, the great divine courtyard. In front of us is the facade of the royal palace, and you can now perfectly compare the already formed picture of the voluminous structure of the entrance to the complex of Djoser with this image of the archaic palace. Imagine the towers, imagine the niches, and here in one of these niches was the passage to the royal residence. I will show you this fragment of the image because here in this ancient era of the existence of the Egyptian civilization, and the symbol of the palace becomes the room in which the king's name is inscribed. He is Horjet, the snake. Therefore, the hieroglyph of the snake is inscribed here inside this great courtyard. And later in the Egyptian tradition, such a rectangle with a stylized image of the royal palace facade will be called Serek. The first of the 5 names of the Egyptian king will be inscribed in the temple tomb inscriptions. It is curious, but you and I already know that many elements of the cultural image of ancient Egypt have existed for many centuries. If on the left we still see the symbolic image of the stele of Horajet, the snake from the Louvre, then on the right is the image of the same Serek, the entrance to the royal palace. Only now in front of us is the wall of the temple of the god Horajet in Edfu. That is, this is the 2nd century BC, the 30th century BC, and the 2nd century BC. And if in the first case it is the royal name, then in the second case there is a golden falcon at the top of the royal palace. And here it is generally the representation of royalty as such. That is why we will look at fragments of palace complexes in different eras, but still a certain prototype, a certain perfect palace, which was laid down essentially by Zokim-Imhotep, the great builder of the first Egyptian pyramid. He will be present in one way or another with elements, decorations, architectural fragments, and all those complexes that we will talk about. Curiously, the first evidence of how the royal palaces were built was not only conveyed to us, and the grottos of the late buildings are not only the royal ceremonial steles, but also the royal sarcophagi. Before you is a magnificent sculptural portrait of King Menkaure. This is the 4th dynasty. This is the builder of the 3rd of the 3 great pyramids of Giza. Wise and Perring, successful English archaeologists in the pyramid of Menkaure, found a magnificent sarcophagus. You see its reconstruction now. Let's see. Accordingly, on both sides, 2 types of this sarcophagus you see now in the illustration. This is a long side and a short one. It is rectangular, and this is an imitation of a holistic palace. That is the very residence inside which is its ruler. That is the natural Egyptian king. Here again, and high towers and niches and passages in these niches, and symbolically in the niches in the central vertical of each niche, there is such a junction. In fact, we are talking about that. This price list, which closes the passage into the royal palace, and it is raised, rolled up into such a drum, a horizontal sign, that the passages into this world are open. In this case, since it is a sarcophagus for the entity of the deceased king. The sarcophagus was of amazing beauty, but unfortunately I will show you only a reconstruction, because at the moment when it was taken out of Egypt and transported on ships to Europe during the shipwreck, it died in the Biscay Gulf, not far from Spain. And this is one of the obsessive ideas of the Spanish archaeologists, to still find the sarcophagus of King Amenkaure at the bottom of the sea. Fortunately, the contents of the sarcophagus, including the wooden coffin and the remains of the royal mummy, were transported on another ship. They reached the shores of Great Britain and are now kept in the collection of the British Museum in London. Not only the sarcophagus of King Amenkaure depicted the royal palace, but also many of the court sarcophagi of those people who were connected with the person of the king, with the duties. They also reproduce the royal residence in the form of their last abode. But the sarcophagus of Amenkaure was exceptional in terms of its performance, and at the moment it is probably one of the biggest losses of Egyptian archaeology. There is one very important detail that we must immediately touch upon. We know that the entire architecture of the ancient world is polychrome, it is bright, it is colourful, and the outstanding reconstructor of French and Egyptian architecture, Franck Meunier, based on the preserved fragments of painting and the preserved images of the facades of the royal palace, made this absolutely amazing reconstruction, which gives you the opportunity to imagine what the royal residence looked like. That is, it is something very bright, very beautiful, decorated with images of 2 sheets of papyrus. And if you look closely, judging by the preserved analogues, those sections where 2 stems with sheets of papyrus or flowers are connected together in yellow light. They are very beautifully repeated on the facade. And in fact, these are windows, and these plants are wooden joints that form a kind of frame. The decoration of the palace was based on the ancient idea that the tent in which the prehistoric ruler was located was decorated with beautiful coloured tiles, and therefore what you see is the decoration that reproduces a bright tile, which hangs on the pillars and covers the holy person of the ruler. In the centre, accordingly, there is a passage, and again this semicircular architectural element shows an open entrance turned into a drum. On the left is a reconstruction, and on the right is a real fragment of the image of the facade of the royal palace from the Pyramid complex of Saint-Saëns of the First Liège. This is the 20th century, and here you can see how rich the decorative form is. There's also polychromy and details, literally the finest details of the elements of this royal facade. Here, from the very beginning, we must imagine a very bright, very ceremonial entrance to the royal palace. And here, in addition to the monumentality, of course, we are talking about the colour and the flagstaffs that stood in front of the royal palace, and about the sculptural images of the Pharaoh and the sphinxes. We will talk about all this with you. That is, on the one hand, this is a structure very similar to the ancient Egyptian temple, and on the other hand, fundamentally different from it. And due to the fact that for thousands of years, the same canon of the image of the facade moved from epoch to epoch, that is, according to the appearance of the building, it was always possible to determine that this is not a temple. This is, of course, a sacred monastery because the king is a sacred person, but this is exactly the palace complex. Another very important thing that we will face today is that the palace always stood on a high platform, and sometimes the platform was up to 13 metres high. I will show you today such archaeological evidence, and thus, over a large city, the palace rose. On the one hand, this saved the palace in the event of a high wall. On the other hand, it was also a function of natural defence and protection. It made it easier for the guards to fight. But one more thing here is pursued by the Egyptian architect. Just like the temple, the palace is considered a great sanctuary, a place of revelation of the great deity. And the hill that stands under the temple is the ancient hill, the famous ancient hill of the Egyptian cosmogonic legends, which rises again and again from the pre-eternal chaos, so that on the throne, in a great place, the earthly embodiment of the deity, that is the ruling king. Yes, unfortunately, the palaces have not been preserved from the period of the pyramids. Only fragments are known. But in order to now imagine this space and fill its interiors not only with the names of great pharaohs, but also with some objects, I will show you a thing that will not be free at all. These are the famous elements of furniture found in the secret tomb of the Queen of Kitip-Keres, the mother of the Pharaoh Khufu. This is palace furniture of the 4th dynasty. That is, it is from the 26th century to the new era. This is her bed. This is a magnificent chair in the armrests of which 3 flowers of papyrus are intertwined, and a box in which jewellery of the queen was found. And all this is closed on top by a luxurious baldachin, which is made of gilded wood. We know such a baldachin from the images of the Egyptian king's bedrooms. Therefore, this is a great miracle that even without the palace of Khufu, we do not know where he was. You can imagine what his mother's bedroom looked like, thanks to this unique find, which at the beginning of the 20th century was made by the outstanding American archaeologist George Reisner. If the palaces of this era have not been preserved, then the events that took place there are known to us in sufficient detail. Here is a wonderful fragment of the copper statue of Pharaoh Pepi I. This is the 24th century to the new era. By the way, pay attention, this is the rarest case of such an ancient copper statue because they were floating in the ancient world and especially in the Middle Ages. And here's a unique case of when in the temple of Rakon Pol, a stunning monument to the meteorite of full growth preserved the appearance of the king and this magnificent crustacean eye, with Pepi IV, one of the outstanding courtiers and noblemen, was the Tsar's military commander Una, the tomb of which is biography. The text was so important that it was cut from the wall of the tomb and transported to the Egyptian Museum in Korea. You see this encyclopedic text now in front of you. His Majesty appointed me a judge in the mouths of the city of Nein, because he relied on me more than on any other of his servants. I conducted an interrogation alone with the chief judge, the supreme judge, in the case of any secret court case on behalf of the Tsar, on behalf of the Tsar's women's house, or 6 supreme courts. So His Majesty relied on me more than on any other of his servants, more than on any other of his noblemen, more than on any other of his servants. There was a case in the Tsar's women's house against the wife of the Tsar Eurytmantez in great secrecy. His Majesty ordered me to go down to the dungeon to conduct an interrogation alone. And there was not a single chief judge or any other of his servants except for me alone, because I used my position and was guided by His Majesty, and because His Majesty relied on me. I conducted this recording alone with one judge in the mouths of Nein, which my duty was then modest. Never before has a person in my position listened to a secret case of the Tsar's women's house, but His Majesty ordered me not to listen because I used my position, and His Majesty relied on me more than on any other of his servants, more than on any other of his noblemen, more than on any other of his servants. The first case that was initiated against the Queen Eurytmantez, which tried to make a conspiracy against him, was based on a very bad story of his predecessor Teti, who was killed by a personal guard, which we know from later historical sources that have preserved this story to us. If we look with you at the written memory of the goddess of Egypt, then of course such stories will be recorded not so often, because to admit that the great throne was in shock, to admit that the Tsar was killed, to admit that there were secret cases in the Tsar's dungeons which were connected with the conspirators, it was the same as to admit the absence of divine nature in the figure of the Tsar himself. Therefore, only in such intimate biographies, which were placed on the inner walls of some tombs, in these biographies, such separate echoes of those events that sometimes broke the Tsar's residence. We are now in the south of Egypt, about 20 kilometers north of Luxor. When I say the name Deir el-Balas, it will not say anything even to those people who have been engaged in Egyptology for many years. This is a great rarity. You see such a wonderful building of a modern hospital, the Upper Egyptian classical city, these ruins which were once part of one of the most famous Egyptian palaces. Yes, alas, we will often say, oh and ah, when we see the preservation of the structures we are talking about. In the 16th century BC, the outstanding Sufyan ruler Tsar Sakin Enrata began a struggle with the nomads and the Hyksos, who then conquered the northern part of Egypt. It was a time when Egypt was waging a war for national independence, and with long efforts of both Tsar Sakin Enra and his relative Kamis, his son Yahmis. As a result, the Hyksos were defeated, their capital in northern Egypt was taken, and as a result, in the very beginning of the 16th century BC, the Philae became the great capital of Egypt and a huge, brilliant era of the new kingdom. Apparently, the palace complexes of Balas were the main royal residence of this time. They were the northern outpost of the province, and judging by the paintings in the main hall of the palace, the scenes of the battle were depicted there. Apparently victorious, of course, and this was not accidental, because the palace was created in that era when for several generations Egypt tried to achieve national independence and defeat the enemies. Let's look at what is left. On the map you see two rectangles, green and red. These are two palace complexes of Deir el Balas, a large northern palace, and look how close the zone of modern agricultural work. This is a traditional problem of the Nile Valley, and the southern palace, which is located on the rocky slopes and which was once amazingly beautiful. All we see today are the walls, which are preserved approximately at a height of 60 to 70 centimetres. This is the base of the columns of the throne hall, but still the material is enough to make a reconstruction and imagine what it looked like. On the left is a reconstruction of the southern palace. We see the central structure. This is the main reception hall of the ruler. You know, it was always higher in height than all surrounding rooms. This is one of the characteristic features of the Egyptian palace. And in the difference between the ceilings, between the height of the walls, windows were made, which thus surrounded the hall of the royal presence. The back part always contained a kind of lamp, where on a special platform there was always a royal throne, and on both sides adjacent rooms. There were rooms for royal women, and a huge number of various barns, storerooms, because each palace had a very large economic unit. Not just provisions were stored here, sometimes the state stock of jewellery and the state stock of weapons. All these complexes were surrounded by whole structures in which those lived and inhabited from whom the life of the palace depended. The main material of the Egyptian palace was the brick, because everything that is built for centuries, everything that is built for the gods is of course a stone. Therefore sometimes the Egyptian temples come to our time so well. Here on the one hand is a brick so brightly white. On the other hand, a large number of precious materials were incorporated into the brick. This is faience, this is gold. These are precious materials. This is the most expensive tree. This is cedar, tamarisk, sycamore. That is, on the one hand, this is a very short-lived main structure of the brick of the heart. On the other hand, the wealth, which in the era of the smuts was dominated by the first, because due to this unprotectedness, the palace was quite vulnerable to structures. In the upper right part of the frame, you see a reconstruction of the northern palace. To it from below led the very first monumental staircase in the history of Egyptian architecture. It was a huge decorated sacred staircase which was carved in a rocky ledge. Accordingly, the nobles who arrived in the residence of the ruler, they slowly raised from the channel adjacent to the royal residence. There were two large halls from which the reception area for those who entered the palace. Very few people have been there in their lifetime. Two, and here played a symbolic role. One hall for representatives of Upper Egypt, one for representatives of Lower Egypt. This is the binary system of the country. It was also observed here in the palace complex. Then there was a reception hall, a throne room, and around, of course, all the other rooms. The palace in Balas has been preserved for Egyptian secular architecture very well. Despite the fact that we see such ruins, it contained the history of great victories. It was from the palace in Balas that Soken-Enro went to his famous battle with the Hyksos, where the king was killed. After that, his son Iachmes I came to power, who still successfully drove the nomads out of Egypt and founded a brilliant new kingdom. In 1881, according to the royal cache in Deir el-Bahri, the mummy of the king Soken-Enro was found, which bore the most incredible evidence of how difficult this story was. He had 6 wounds on his head, he was beaten with an axe to the head, he was very badly embalmed because apparently the king's body was pulled out from the battlefield. He had his hands tied with rags of fire. Nevertheless, this is the body of the great hero, the great philanthropian ruler, without the events of his reign that took place in Balas. As we now know, there would not have been his son Iachmes. There would not have been the preparation of the liberation movement that led to the birth of a brilliant new Egyptian kingdom. The wife of the king Soken-Enro, the great Queen Yehotep, you know very well, the funeral of the Queen Yehotep was among the luxurious decorations. In large numbers was found the highest military order of Egypt, the Great Order of the 3 Golden Mug. Now this is the Egyptian Art Museum in Luxor. Here again we recall the story of how the great wife of the king collected provisions, collected troops, and organised the whole rear for her husband, who fought with the states in the north, so hard that for the first time, at least the only case in Egyptian history, when a woman received the Egyptian highest military order. If we look at the map of Egypt, then here below Pharaohs, that is modern Luxor, then 20 kilometres north of Deir el-Balas, where we were with you just now, and we will move with you to the very northeast of Egypt, where was the city of Tahutuaret, called by the Greeks Avaris. It was the old Hyksos capital, the capital of those nomads who fought the Fivan royal house who tried to take Egypt. As a result, when Iachmes I expels the Hyksos and reunites Upper and Lower Egypt into a single kingdom, in the place of the old Hyksos palace, he founded his palace complex. It was a very important point. He, in fact, re-enlightened the place of the Northern Kingdom. And for many decades, Austrian and German scientists carried out research in Tahutuaret. They found out that it is a delta very close to the Mediterranean Sea. There are the highest levels of salt and soil water, but nevertheless, a lot can be understood. And the upper frame is how this part of the delta looks like. On the one hand, Egyptian life, on the other hand, quite salty soil, because during the great earthquakes in antiquity, the Mediterranean Sea invaded the delta and left just such terrible swamps that did not heal on the body of the Egyptian land for many centuries. And here is a geomagnetic reconnaissance, which is done in the modern field. There they graze on buffaloes, not always even on tractors. There they grow Egyptian bread, fruits, vegetables and flowers, which are then supplied to Holland. And now look at what a giant city is actually hidden under the fields. And the Palace F, this is the central residence, and another residence even larger because it included a temple. This is the Palace G. They are clearly visible on this map. What were these structures? Let's look at the structure of a large palace. First we come across a ramp. That is, it is a ramp that leads to the palace. The Egyptians liked ramps more than stairs because for Egypt they were more functional, and it was easier to drag a stone sculpture on a ramp any heavy load. Then, of course, this is the courtyard, which on three sides is decorated with colonnades, porticos. In fact, most of the highest ranking noblemen who ever invited to the royal residence, they saw only this courtyard. And to them, from the king, came a messenger or some higher ranking nobleman. To see the royal person was an extremely rare event, and it could only be done in some special occasions or during holidays. I'll tell you a little more about this. Then we pass from the courtyard to such a narrow, long, perpendicular hall, which is also decorated with colonnades. The word vestibule is written. This is actually the waiting room. That is, those who were in power could be closer to the royal person. And here, the Egyptian official apparatus is colossal. The number of titles, fictitious or real, the number of places that were next to the king, it was huge. There was a wearer of royal sandals and a wearer of royal holiday sandals, a wearer of the apokala on the right from His Majesty, a wearer of the great royal seal of Lower Egypt, a wearer of the royal seal of Upper Egypt. All these people were at the king's food. That is, they were rewarded with food. They were rewarded with land. They were rewarded with gold. They were rewarded with serfs. That is, it was a colossal official, oriental, administrative apparatus, sometimes completely irreversible and very difficult. Therefore here, depending on your position, on your status, on your position, you could be in the courtyard or in the waiting room, or even enter the throne room. This is already a very great honour. In the throne room there's a niche where once was on the platform, usually 60 to 70 centimetres high, the king's throne. The king is always on a kind of ramp which is higher than the floor on which all his courtyards are located. Accordingly, behind the royal throne room are the royal chambers. Here is the storage of especially valuable items and royal toilets and the stairs that led to the roof of the palace, because in the especially hot summer months it was possible to cool down there. But at the same time there's also a house temple, as it is all clear to us. That is how deep the story goes. And in general, the temple complex, and one temple complex, it is apparently available in the court. And the house temple, it is for the high priest and for the palace itself. In the era of the Middle Kingdom, a wonderful monument was created by the Egyptian literature. And this is the biography of Sinuhet, who tells about the nobleman who, frightened by the conspiracy against Amenemhet I, about whom we have already mentioned today, being a personal friend of the heir to the throne of Senusert, but incredibly afraid of murder in the palace complex, he flees to Asia. In Asia, he had a fate. He became a respected person there. At some point, King Senusert I, who, in spite of the conspirators, took his legal throne, he writes him a letter. In this letter, he recalls his childhood friend and says that he needs to return. And in order to lure such a very believing Egyptian, he promises him a perfect Egyptian burial, describing how good it will be to be buried in the native land, how good it will be to return to the land of the ancestors. Then Senusert returns to Egypt, and the text of this literary work, absolutely amazing, allows us to imagine what was happening in such throne halls. It was almost dawn, they called to call me. 10 people came. 10 people sent me to the palace. When I touched the forehead of the earth between the sphinxes, the royal children stood at the gates, greeting me. The court officials entering the cold court indicated to me the way to the hall of the Oedipus. I found His Majesty sitting on the great throne under the golden canopy. I prostrated on my stomach in front of him and paid homage. This god greeted me kindly, I was like a person engulfed in darkness. The soul left me. My body became powerless. There was no more heart in my chest. I was neither alive nor dead. And I said to His Majesty, one of these officials, raise him, let him speak to me. His Majesty said, here you are back after you have travelled to foreign countries. From China you took your feather. You have aged. It is not unimportant to bury a body. You will not be buried in Asia. So don't do it. Don't harm yourself in the future. You don't speak, although your name was mentioned. And I was afraid of punishment and answered in fright. But what does my master tell me? If I could say that I did not do this, it would be a disgrace, a horror that is in me now, like pushing me to childhood. Here I am before you. I beg you. You belong to life. Yes, your Majesty will do as he wishes. They ordered to bring the royal children, and His Majesty said to the royal wife, look, Sinuha has returned, like an Asian-born Asian. And she screamed outrageously, looking at me, and the royal children all lay down together, and they exclaimed, answering His Majesty, this is not he, in truth, Lord, our ruler, but Brahmo, well, His Majesty, this is the truth. Then they brought the necklaces, rags, musical instruments with them, and brought His Majesty with words. Stretch out your hands, O King, eternal ruler, beautiful, to the brotherhood of the Queen of Heaven. Yes, the golden goddess will send down life to your children. Yes, the Queen of the stars will unite with you. Yes, the crown of the top will go down, and the crown of the bottom will rise up. Yes, they will unite in one word, your Majesty. Yes, they will place a sacred urn on your forehead so that you will keep the people away from evil. Yes, there will be mercy on you. O ruler of the lands, give air to the one who is suffocating. Please give us our dear gift. This is the leader of the nomads, the son of the goddess Mayhed, an Asian born in Egypt. Only out of fear before you did he make his escape. Only out of horror before you did he leave the country. The face of the one who sees your appearance and does not frighten the eye looking at you. And His Majesty said, let him not be afraid, let him not be frightened. He will be the Lord among the nomads. He will be led into the court environment. Go to the morning rest to serve him. I came out of the audience hall, and the royal children held me in their arms, and we went to the great double gates. They placed me in the house of the Tsarevich. The bathroom is magnificent in it. The mirrors are copper. The treasures from the house of silver were there. The clothes from the royal linen. The world and the first-class oil for the Tsar and the nobleman who he loves in every room. Each servant was within his own year. They came down from my shoulders, shaved me, cut my hair. The time was given to the desert. My clothes are rolling on the sands. I was dressed in a thin linen cloth, moistened with first-class oil. I sleep now on the bed. I gave the sands that live in them, and the wooden oil to the one who is moistened with them. The text is absolutely amazing, but it actually tells one more thing. Look, Senukit was a friend of Senusert. Before he became the Tsar, it was his friend. That is, they had a bright childhood together. Here the status of the Tsar is completely different after the coronation. He literally says that my father left me. That is, my consciousness left me. He really was neither alive nor dead, because for him it was already a creature of a completely different nature. Although, of course, the literary presentations brilliantly show the horror and laughter that the great queen and her children experience when looking at his Asian, born in Egypt. And one more important point, Egyptian texts We will only encounter this once tonight. Glorified the Proverbs in every way. That is, these canonical Proverbs about the pillar of the earth, about the universe, and then about 40 minutes they are naturally present in the royal ceremony. And then another detail which also needs to be excluded from this text, in order for our representation of the palace to begin to come to life more and more. There is a person, a high nobleman, who conveys the words of Sanehet to the Tsar, and the Tsar naturally answers himself. That is, here all this is permeated with an incredible, structured, canonical ceremony of the palace, in which, of course, human life did not remain, sometimes not so much. Let's go back to Tahu Tuareg. This is a reconstruction of the palace in Avaris. You see here luxurious rectangular columns. All this was very beautifully whitewashed, decorated, sometimes covered with paintings. And these paintings were incredible. After the explosion of the volcano on Santorini, Cretan artists fled to Egypt, and this northern palace was painted by fashionable foreign artists in the best style, which you know very well from the frescoes of the Knos Palace on the island of Crete. When this discovery was made in Egypt, it was absolutely sensational. Unfortunately, it did not reach Russia at all. We practically do not know it. And here's a traditional Cretan plot. Tavramahia, games with a bull. An acrobat who, in a jump, grabbing the horns of a bull, jumps over an enraged beast. Inside the symbolic image labyrinth. Magnificent sockets at the bottom. Fortunately, enough fragments of these paintings have been preserved to show you one more wall of the royal palace in Avaris. See what an incredible beauty. And here is an amazing evidence of the conjunction of artistic styles of ancient Egypt and the fading world of Cretan Mycenaean culture. And of course the colours are also absolutely amazing. These are mineral paints which were applied on a traditional piece. That is a great thin sifted plaster, which the walls of the palace were white before the painting was made. If you look closely, the reconstruction is done very correctly. You will see where the real fragments are preserved and where accordingly the work of a modern artist who collects all these parts of the destroyed mosaic in order for us to imagine how it used to look like. We are heading south to the great Ephora, to the great city, which in ancient times was called Wasid, a powerful modern Luxor. It is here that the story of one of the most interesting and rich information and amazing things about the palace complex awaits us. Unfortunately, the main palace of Favansky has not been preserved because when Egypt was conquered in the first millennium BC by the Assyrian troops, the Assyrians burned the Ephora. They spared only the temples. That is why when you come to Egypt on the eastern bank of the Nile in Luxor, you see the Karnatic temple, the Luxor temple, but you do not see the urban architecture. And we only know about the place where the main royal residence was located. But the western bank, the reconstruction of which was done by the outstanding French archaeologist and architect Jean-Claude Gaulevin, I'm now showing you, the western bank prepares an amazing surprise for us, which in my opinion is able to amaze any imagination. So let's find out what is inside this reconstruction. At the lower right corner is the great epithesium, the perfect place. This is the Karnatic temple. From it there is an alley connecting it with the temple of the goddess Mut, and the long alley, 3 kilometers long, connects the Karnatic complex with Luxor. Here, around these temples, there was a living massif of the city of Thebes. The western bank is the great necropolis, the great top of the west, which today is called El Kun. Far away in the rocky space is the temple of the Queen Hatshepsut of the El Bahri Empire. Further is the Ramesseum, a huge colossus of at least a third before its house, which is about 1 million years old, a colossus of Lemnon. Then there's a massive complex of the third in the Medina-i Abum, and then you should be surprised by a huge lake which is located to the south. Here it is very important not to be mistaken in size. The length of the lake is 2 kilometers. The width of the lake is 1 kilometer. This is a famous man-made lake which Amenhotep III in the 14th century BC, in the era of the brilliant rise of the Egyptian state, built in order to build his summer residence nearby, which was called Spare Kai, which today bears the Arabic name Al-Malkata. Malkata is the place where some things are found. This is the best comment with which you need to start the history of this palace. Think about it. 1 kilometer wide. It was a kind of bay which is comparable to the Nile. Sometimes it was just wider than the Nile in some parts of its flow. From all sides, the Birket Abim Lake was surrounded by giant dams which held the lake at the borders that had been drawn. For the construction of these dams, the soil was used, which was extracted at the time of construction of this lake, a grandiose structure. On the western bank of the Birket Abum Lake was the palace of Spare Kai, the favourite summer residence of Amenhotep III. Inside it was the entire royal court. There were also famous ceremonies of the celebration of the renewal of life of the king and his connection with the world of the gods. The second role was always played by the famous Queen Tea, which we will talk about today. Finally, the first years of the youth of the future great Queen Nefertiti. We are greeted by the sculptural cheetah of Amenhotep III. Tea is a 7-meter sculptural group that now is located in the atrium of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. The era of Amenhotep III is absolutely brilliant because the multi-generational achievements of the previous Egyptian kings allowed him to be such an Egyptian Ludovic XIV, such a king of the sun. His king of the sun is often called in science. These are huge temple buildings, palaces, holidays, trading, correspondence with other foreign states, and a completely brilliant courtyard. I'm going to show you the elements of this courtyard now. Before we do this, look again at the era of photography of the modern Luxor. Anyone who has been to the West can imagine the complex of the Taboo and what a huge lake there was. Now, the territory of this lake is one of the most fertile parts of the western coast. Everything is covered with fields, agricultural work is carried out there. Here, on the edge of this lake, there is a palace, which I will tell you about today. In fact, there is not much left. If you look at the western coast, you can still see these fortified shores of the lake with such specific hills. They were depicted even in antiquity. But the palace itself, of course, is much more interesting. The first excavations were made here in 1911 to 1912. At first, this place did not have an incredible amount of data that it gave archaeologists. And now, aerial photography. How the central part of the palace looks today. Tourists rarely go there, but if you come there, the guards are very positive about the fact that they will show you these premises instead of someone. But in order to imagine what was here, you need to know very well the material that was brought from here, and first of all to the American Museum. This is a big problem when it comes to the Egyptian palace. In order to imagine this complex, you need to imagine a monument to the Metropolitan Museum, things that were brought to the museum in Oxford. This is a mosaic that was once a part of a single magnificence. If you walk, you'll sometimes find amazing fragments of painting in the sand. The whole palace, as well as other similar structures, was built from brick of the heart. It was covered with a thin layer of a mixture consisting of linseed and gypsum. On these thick layers of the usual plaster, a thin plaster was made from a piece of porcelain gypsum, and accordingly, a painting was made on this soil. What you see now is a huge figure of the neck of the goddess Herbet. Herbet is a part of the ceiling of the corridor that once led to the royal residence. If these fragments are preserved quite poorly, then during the early excavations at the beginning of the 20th century, they were found amazing materials that allow you to see all the luxury that once was here. In general, the palace is gigantic. It has more than 60 rooms. It was first built in the 1930s by the management of the third Minakarte for the ceremony of his first holiday. Sed is saying the holiday of Sed, the holiday of the 30th anniversary, as it is sometimes called, was associated with the idea that by the 30th year of rule, the power of the ruler was lost. He no longer had such a direct connection with the heavenly world. He lost his physical strength. Then a complex ceremonial was held. This holiday is known from the deep antiquity, from the 3rd millennium of the 2nd century. Then he returned to the company of the gods, and at the same time the process of this ritual was updated, both his physical and mental strength. After the first holiday of Sed was held in the 30th year of rule, it was possible to spend as many holidays of Sed as you wanted if the king needed them. As a result, here in Turkey, 3 holidays of Sed were held not only here, but also in the surrounding territory. And the complex, as a result, over the years it has grown because every next holiday the palace became more and more magnificent, more ceremonial. In addition to the palace structures, in which we will soon visit, on the territory of the complex, there was a large temple of Amun, which was severely damaged during the religious reforms of Akhenaton a few decades later. Nevertheless, there was a large courtyard temple, in the centre of which there was a large granodier statue of Amun, fragments of which were found. What you see on the right is an oval of cartouche with the king's name. In it is written Nebmatra. Ra is the Lord of Truth. This is the throne name of Amenhotep III. This is not a picture at all. These are made of wood covered with gold, a real 14th century cartouche, which is encrusted with blue faience. This is an element of the door of the temple of the god Amun in Malkat. At the time of the initial works in the wrestling complex in 1911, here is a modern football field. Children play football here in the centre of the temple of Amun of Malkat. Here inside, this was probably what? This is a fragment of the door of the naos of the god Amun in the palace temple. Cedar wood, gold and azure glass. I understand that this is only a fragment. Here, turn on your imagination, because these evidence will give you an incredible picture of what was there, where the modern football field is now. On top is a classical Egyptian rounded cornice, also made of wood, gold and a rich incrustation. These are parts of a giant naos in which once there was a divine statue which was an object of worship. A little further, next to the complex of the temple, was the palace itself. Let's try to figure it out. So the yard is at the top. The first halls are very different. The central hall, H, is for the audience. Then there is a hall with 4 columns and a podium. This is the throne room. This is the throne hall. That is the closest to the Tsar. We're here where the red circle is. This is the Tsar's bedroom. Quite a lot was preserved from it. Everything on the sides is the Tsar's woman's house and storage. All the walls of the palace were richly painted. I will show you some fragments so that the picture starts to appear in your mind. A fragment of a painting from the Tsar's woman's house. This is the room where the clothes were stored, and on the pilasters inside this room there are such amazing images of cups filled with fruits. These are pomegranates. Now this is the Metropolitan Museum. All this was cut out, layered off the walls and exported to the United States of America. This is very offensive because many fragments are still preserved in Malkat. In the 80s, Japanese specialists from the University of Waseda, if you have permission, you are allowed to see those sections of the floor where the paintings were kept. Fragments of the walls where the paintings were kept. But still, the main and most beautiful monuments were taken out during the first excavations. And here's a very important thing. We are used to seeing the being of the Tsar, the Tsar of God. We are used to seeing the world of gods. We are used to seeing ceremonial relations, signs of eternal life, signs of non-governance. We still calculate the temple. There was absolutely nothing here. Fruits in cups, bulls that rush through the papyrus groves, ducks that fly into the swamps, beautiful ornaments, palm trees and sockets. This is a very beautiful, ceremonial, polychrome, absolutely secular world inside which the Tsar was, whom, believe me, there was enough divine space inside which he himself was a god. Here they had fun, sang, danced and drank wine. I will tell you about the last one completely separately, but first let's look further. Floors, ducks flying out of the papyrus groves. The top is an illustration of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. The bottom is this wonderful duck. Look at what an incredible blue cobalt colour. At that moment, Egypt was learning to make objects with a cobalt coating. We did not find cobalt in the Western Desert. Cobalt, papyruses, ducks, water. What an incredible Egyptian impressionism. It's insanely beautiful. These are very secular things. They're very ceremonial and very joyful. You can imagine how the young Nefertiti walked on these floors when she was still a young girl in the early years, when she was brought up here in the palace of Malkate. Of course, you want to imagine what it looked like. Thanks to the generations of archaeologists and the magnificent architect-archaeologist Franco Munier, this can be done. This is the parade gallery of Malkate, which leads to the throne room. Here, absolutely exactly, every detail of the floor is restored. Please note the rare lotus-shaped capitals of the columns. We are used to the Egyptian architecture that in temples they confuse papyrus buds with water lilies, with lotuses. This is how a lotus-shaped capital looks like, and a polychrome painting that completely corresponds to the original. It was very beautiful. Accordingly, the lighting of the palace is done through the windows with grills, due to the fact that the central galleries, as well as in the palace of Tafatuaret, were higher than all other rooms. We go further along the palace. The beauty is impossible. Moreover, if on the sides are water spaces from which ducks fly out, then the central road along which the king walks, here is an image of onions, because 9 onions is a symbolic designation of all those peoples that belong to Egypt, and the image of lying captives with characteristic features of the Asians, Yemits, Nubians, that is, all those peoples that were considered subordinate to Egypt. And imagine there is already a golden throne on the platform, next to which is the courtyard. This is incredibly beautiful. And this is a very secular space. This is completely unexpected for our idea of what the residence of the Egyptian king looks like. Fortunately, at that moment when the courtyard collapsed, the ceilings fell to the floor. Therefore, when the Americans began to explore the palace, they quickly realized this and did not mix the layers. As a result, the upper layer was collected first, and the ceiling was obtained, under which the painting of the floor lay. I will now show you fragments of the painting of the ceiling of Malachite. The central nef, this is the flying nef of the goddess of troubles, with the circles of the Shen, with the circles of the infinite rotation of the sun in the pose, the throne titulature of Malachite III, and then this idea stretched by a bright, beautiful, expensive pricing. It becomes the main for the decoration of the palace. And here, look, even the dimensions are shown. This is the ceiling of a particular gallery. And here is another fragment where the central part also imitated the pricing. Look at the brightness of the colour. It is very bright, very ceremonial space. And this is the space that, I repeat again, it is very important to understand this is what was obtained as a result of colossal labour at the beginning of the 20th century. Because this is where Grisha was found in such a state. It was collected in pieces, glued to a new base, and all the most preserved, the most interesting details, of course, were taken out to the Metropolitan Museum. There is a whole hall in New York dedicated to the monuments of Malachite. There are a lot of them where you can imagine what the Egyptian palace looked like. I'll show you a sad picture. These are the bricks of hearts that were at the base of the pedestal for the royal throne. This is the royal throne, everything that was left of it. But according to the images of the tombs of Limoges of this time, we can imagine in great detail what was really here. In one of the tombs of this time, there is an image that was taken out to the Luxor Museum. You can see it. It sits on the pedestal of Amenhotep III. Everything is just flooded with this golden sunlight. Behind it is the figure of his mother, Queen Mutamui, and the figure of the king on the golden throne is surrounded by a whole row of such wooden curtains which are richly decorated with images of flowers. All these elements of decoration are heraldic, because here the lily of Upper Egypt goes to the papyrus of Lower Egypt, or to the flowers of the water lily. Here the papyrus is more clearly visible. Here are more bouquets of flowers. That is, all this is decorated, painted, tied with coloured ribbons. We know from the inscriptions of that time that the royal palace was decorated with garlands of living flowers, and they loved them very much. And this is a completely incredible space. This is what the palace complex of Malkatha and the main throne room, the royal throne itself, is beautifully depicted. Here too, you see the hieroglyphic lily and papyrus intertwined around the trachea, which breathes Egypt, a sign that the king is well-to-do and he is worthy of becoming the god of the core who reigned over the earth. Not only the Queen Mutamuya played a big role in the court of Amenhotep III, her wife, Queen Tay. I will show you another painting, which I consider to be an absolutely incredible masterpiece of its time. This is the royal Chitat on the throne. This is a facsimile copy, a painting from the tomb of Mr. Anen, who is the brother of Queen Tay. Let's stop for a second, we will not hurry. So again, the royal Chitat. The first figure is Amenhotep III. See what a wonderful stand he has under his feet. also the captives of the people of the whole earth. She Matawe under his throne, the armrest of the Sphinx defeating the enemies. Of course, we immediately make a project and remember the things found in the tombs of the Institute of Hammon, because it is impossible to imagine everything from the abundance of gold, lazurites, silver, which is in these amazing monuments. In front of him is a rich vertical bouquet of living flowers. The great wife of the Tsar sits behind him. She has a charming little bouquet of living flowers in her hands, a bouquet in the form of a symbol of hell, a symbol of eternal life. Queen Tay loved animals, we know this. Here's her favourite cat with a goose in an embrace. We know that the goose was accepted into the Egyptian house, that is, the dog was a feral animal, and the cat, goose and monkey were included in the house of the Egyptian. Here is a wonderful monkey. Egyptian animalism exceeds all expectations. She is beautifully depicted. Here's such a cute bustle that takes place around the throne. This is also Malachite. This is an image of what happens in Malakate. The pedestal of the throne itself is richly decorated. It depicts different peoples who are connected by a neck with a heraldic papyrus and a water lily. Nubians, Syrians, Amorites, Cretans. This is a very rare image. Here it is written Keftio. Keftio is what the author of the Bible, this is a Cretan. He has very characteristic clothes. Clothes of these peoples can also be studied in these eras. Let's go back from the tomb of Anan to Malakat. We have not seen everything yet. The closer we get to the royal chambers, namely to the private royal chambers, the more unusual the decoration becomes. We will now see the ceiling, the room that adjoined to the royal bedroom. The sockets are the images of the heavenly cows, the cows of heavenly prosperity, which look down inside this palace with such symbolic solar discs on one side and half discs and half sockets on the other. They are very gracefully decorated. Here, of course, the Egyptian artist received all the freedom that he could not afford, neither in the temple space nor in the tomb. This is what the bedroom of Amenhotep III looks like now. In fact, this is a very good preservation for the palace of the 14th century BC. We are very used to the fact that thanks to the contents of the tombs, thanks to the texts, Egypt is incredibly alive, preserved. We are very used to seeing royal papyruses and royal belts, which have been preserved in many museums around the world. But we must realise that thousands of years have passed. And so here, when it comes to the monument, part of which has gone under the processing fields, this is what you see now. This is an absolute miracle. The fragment of the decoration and painting of the lower part of the wall consists of the signs of eternal life, the Ankh, and the sign of the garden, the sign of magical protection, which are on the sign of Neba, that is, all life, all magical protection. That is, the space of the king's bedroom was protected by this world of magical symbols. If for a second we imagine the evening of Amenhotep III, who after another feast, which was a lot, this is a very cheerful time in the history of Egypt. Religious reforms have not yet begun, but there is already wealth in the country from previous generations. He comes to his bedroom, lies on a gilded bed, and opens his eyes and sees this. This is a fragment of the ceiling of the king's bedroom in Mankate, flying pigeons. They do not have the traditional Egyptian meaning of the bird of chaos here. This is still a palace. Here is about life. But the elegance of the painting, the way the artist plays with the transitions of blue and white on the wings of these pigeons, this is of course an absolutely incredible masterpiece of Egyptian art, the Metropolitan Museum in New York. If you go to the United States, you will see it in the whole of the Metropolitan Museum. It is clear that in addition to this space of platy-solid capitals, floors, ceilings, you want to see a little bit of life. And in order to do this, I will show you several items from the wonderful tomb of Yuhi-Tuyi, the parents of Queen Tea, which was found, as you remember, in the Valley of Kings in 1905. And before the tomb of Tutankhamun was the most expensive, the richest archaeological discovery in the south of Egypt, Cairo, the Egyptian Museum, Yuhi-Tuyi's chair. That is, such chairs, they live perfectly in the palace. If we look at a black chair, then in the armrests you see a sacred antelope. This is Ibex in front of him, the symbol of eternal life, which stands on the sign of the ruler, and in the centre, again, the sign of Satan. Behind the back is the central figure of the god Bes, the keeper of the house, the protector from nightmares of the night, from bad luck. And on both sides, based on the sign of Satan, there are two figures of the goddess Tor, also a magical protector, patroness of femininity and motherhood. They all stand on the signs of the golden current Tigla. This is the sign of Neb, a sign of not only gold, but also of immortality. Always in the Egyptian tomb, two absolutely amazing things were done. Firstly, leather crossbar belts were stretched, that is, with a soft tube. Then a pillow was put there. Well, the Egyptians loved pillows very much. Many of them have come to our time. Well, there's nothing monochrome here either. And the pillows were coloured, painted. We will remember them today. This is a real pillow of the 14th century on which the great Tsar's mother, Tuya, put her legs in her residence. The second chair is depicted by her daughter Tsavitsa Tea swimming on a boat during the celebration of some important event. In the 11th century, under his rule, even before the construction of Malkata, thanks to the text preserved on several massive caravans, Amenhotep III decided to make a gift for his wife. He loved Tsavitsa Tea's gifts, and he had the opportunity to make them. As a result, he did what amazed the entire Favanian nobility. In the area of the city of Akhmim, where the birth of Tsavitsa Tea took place, he made her a system of floating lakes, Jaruka. These were 3 lakes that flowed side by side with each other, which were filled with artificial water on which Tsavitsa Tea rode on a golden boat called the Sun Disk. Jaruka was very much loved. Exclusive orchards of fruit trees were located nearby, and at the moment when the Tsar's house was present in Favanian Malkata, the golden youth of that time loved to go to Jaruka with a close look at the great wife of the Tsar, who had a very difficult character. We also know about this. Let's go back inside the palace and look at the box in which the linen was stored. A box with the names of Amenhotep III, the gods of millions of years. Magnificent incrustations on a golden tree are present here. And the lower frieze, on which all the walls of this box are also from the tomb of the Tsar Tsavitsa Tea's parents, are the signs of life, power, and great universal domination. I specially prepared a large frame for you. The colour is exactly this. This is red gold with the addition of copper and minerals. And then imagine that buttons are opened, not just opened, buttons are wrapped in linen cord. A seal is placed so that no one opens what was there without the owner. The seal is broken, the linen cord is untied, the box is opened, and there are embossed with linen cloth, or those decorations that the court was so famous for at that time. Another chair, the most famous, which was presented to the tomb of Yigit by their granddaughter, the great Tsar's daughter, Satamun. The chair is decorated on both sides with sculptural portraits. On the armrests there are priests bearing gifts, and on the central back there is Satamun in the centre with a magnificent sea of water lilies and deltas, in front of which the servants stand and carry such wide necklaces. This is cedar, a very characteristic colour for cedar, a little bit like a white and a little dark tree, and a magnificent golden crustacean. This is a bed tuya. Again, here are not leather belts, but belts made of plant components. And again, different forms of beasts and tours are kept at the foot of the bed. This is not a headrest. This is at the foot, because when you lie on the bed and your head rests on a small headrest on which a soft pillow is placed, you look at the spirits of the defenders who at this moment drive away the nightmares of the night from you. Few people know this, because usually there are no beautiful headrests. In the Egyptian bed, this is at the foot. Moreover, at this time, 14th century BC, examples of the tomb of Tutankhamun were found. A bed was invented, which was made of 3 layers. It was a camping bed if you wanted to rest. And as Senuhit said, when he returned to Egypt, he began to sleep on the bed, like all decent people, like normal court ladies. Therefore, here you can imagine such a bed. I don't want to show you only things from the tomb of Yuhitun. I want to show you a few things that were found in Malakate Metropolitan Museum, New York. A leopard biting something. In fact, there was a container near his mouth. This is a cosmetic spoon. Here, the Egyptian court of beauty of the time of Amenhotep III robbed blush or whitewash or some other pigments that were applied to the face. The number of fragments of cosmetic belongings was quite huge, several thousand. Moreover, both fragments of such spoons and pens from flyers, whole fragments of cosmetic lorries, and absolutely fantastic glass vessels for oil for their time. They were made very simply. From a very porous sandstone, the future shape of the vessel, it was lined with tight melted glass. The Egyptians knew transparent glass, but they did not like it. They liked bright glass. Here is such an incredible game of blue, pale blue, white, yellow. When the lining with thin layers of the vessel is ready, and we take it to the oven, the glass is baked. Then this object comes out of the oven, and in a metallic style, the porous sandstone that was on the basis of this vessel. These are not glass-blown things. These things are made by the method of such application of melted glass on the base. Different forms. Here's the form, which is extremely amazing, very elegant. And there were a lot of fragments of such vessels on the territory of the palace. This is explained in several important details. For example, the era of Amenhotep III is the era of diplomatic marriages, when the world, confined to the surrounding states, was supported by the Tsar's marriage with the princesses of other countries. The fate of these princesses was not very enviable, because they had no chance to become a great wife of the Tsar. They were well-known court ladies, but when Tsar Mithani, this is the territory of northern Syria, southern Turkey today, when Tsar Mithani Shetarno gave his daughter Gelukip for Amenhotep III, 317 of her servants came with her. Now you understand why thousands of fragments of cosmetic vessels, spoons, flyers, and everything else are measured. That is, it was a completely grandiose woman's house of the Tsar. But why did I say that fate is not very enviable? Because once Tamkar is a messenger, spy and translator at the same time, an ambassador, so to speak. The title and name change, but the essence remains the same. The ambassador to the Tsar of Babylon, having arrived at the court of Amenhotep III, he tried to find the daughter of the Tsar of Babylon, who 10 years before married Amenhotep III. And when he asked where his wife was, the courtiers got confused and could not immediately remember who they were talking about. There were many of them, and of course they lived in some royal residences for a very decent salary, but some role that would have left them in history, they of course could not take, and they could not take such a place. We know about this thanks to the magnificent black and white plaque of the Amar Diplomatic Archive from the capital of the son of Amenhotep III, where both documents of that Tsar and earlier documents were preserved, which were associated with the Ivan's court of Amenhotep III. Of my favourite funny things, 2 more short stories, because they also fill the life of the whole house, in which the Tsar's women played a very big role. When Shimon Emelian, the Tsar of Babylon, asked Amenhotep III for a great debt, the fact is that Shimon himself had already betrothed Amenhotep III to his 2 daughters, who had safely got lost somewhere in the ruinous markets. Forgive me for such a comparison. He wanted the daughter of the Egyptian Tsar to live in order to glorify his kingdom. Because Egypt was engaged in very tough foreign policy, it was a closed state, in many ways inaccessible to foreigners, plus of course a state with an absolutely colossal political status. And he writes such signs: "Here is my brother. Twice I sent you my daughters, and they became sweet for you. Impossible. Do me the opposite. Send me your daughter. I will take her as my wife. Answer. Never before has the daughter of the Egyptian Tsar been married abroad. My brother," writes him Kadashman Enlid, "that they came. They say you have a beautiful woman in your yard." One of them came. "Who would dare to say that she's not the daughter of the Tsar? Answer. Never before has the daughter of the Egyptian Tsar been married abroad." There were, of course, the same Kadashman writes, "Gold came to me, because in your land there is gold, which is the sand of the road." And then the gold went to Babylon, and through Babylon and through the state of Syria went other gifts. First of all, the famous Kizbej, the famous Lazarite who loved the Egyptian Tsar so much, who loved the Egyptian emperor so much. One of the tablets of the Almar archive. This is an absolutely amazing opportunity to look into the world of this ruler of the 14th century to the new era. It tells about the following: that the same Tsar of Babylon, who wanted everything from some Egyptian gifts, and the man felt so mobile and curious. And he writes, "Oh, my brother, I heard that on the side of your river great, and in the river a great cow, a huge cow, a terrible cow, she melts here on her way." On the tablet, which is inscribed, because then the Akkadian language was international, there is a comment of an Egyptian writer with a box of ink from the Tsar's name. "Send the mummy of hippopotamus to the room of rarity of my brother, the Tsar of Babylon." This is the only historical evidence that we know that in the Babylonian court there was a room of rarity, such a small hermitage which gathered rarities brought from distant countries. Just like in Egypt, in the temple of the god Amun in Karnak, at the Pharaoh Thutmose III, who was a great conqueror, a stone structure was made. It was called the Botanical Garden, because on the walls of this room were depicted all the rare plants and rare animals of those lands that the warriors of the Pharaoh Thutmose III saw during their military campaigns. Thanks to these contacts in the courtyards were very popular and very fashionable foreign things. This is also perfectly clear. Once at the Pharaoh Thutmose III, this is the 15th century BC, a diplomatic marriage also took place and 3 Syrian princesses came to the court of Thavansky, young, fragile and apparently very beautiful girls who had a whole world of things that the Tsar's daughters did not bring to surprise the Egyptian king and his subjects. As a result, the life in the court developed, the names were changed. It is very interesting. Those ladies who came like foreign princesses to the Egyptian king received an Egyptian name. Their fate ended. They were buried in a single complex. Maybe they were 3 sisters, the famous Menhit Minawa and Merti. This is one of them. This is a fashionable, not Egyptian court thing. It is a mixed glass with different pieces of faience, which melted at a colossal temperature under 900 degrees. In order to make this thing, it was necessary to work very hard, and it turned out to be an incredible burst of colour. Note that the burst of colour is generally devoid of any symmetrical ornament or rigid Egyptian arrangement, as the Egyptian artist likes. The cup is decorated with gold. It is the same object. Everything is kept in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. You can imagine these foreign princesses who sit on such chairs, drink wine from such cups. For example, in the tomb of Velmoji Ramir, who was the vizier of Thutmose III, gifts were depicted which the Syrian princes and rulers sent to the court of Thutmose III. Gold and silver and rings, beautiful decorative golden vessels for the palace. Look here. Here is exactly the same vessel of this technique, decorated with gold, which at the same time these 3 Syrian princesses brought to the court of Thutmose III. And a little bit going forward, although this is the same era of the New Kingdom, I will show you several items without which, in my opinion, it was impossible to live in the palace. This is a ceremonial fan of Tutankhamun. This is the rarest case when cellulose has managed to preserve strong feathers, because when we see huge Egyptian court apakalas, only the golden base and the bones of the feathers are preserved. This is a completely preserved fan. Now, of course, it looks worse. It lies in the Kiev Museum of Exposition. Nevertheless, you still see how beautiful this thing was. The handle of an elephant bone with the richest painting, and painted streaks of blue feathers and white streaks of blue feathers. That is, our image of a court lady or refined nobility becomes more and more rich. And here, of course, I want to ask a question. We have imagined a bedroom of Tutankhamun in Manchuria, or the palace of Tutankhamun in Memphis. How did it look in the evening? Egyptian court apakalas are absolutely amazing. I will show you the most famous of them. This is the palace lamp of Tutankhamun, which was found in his tomb. I show the archive of the Gezi of Werner Foreman because for this shooting they were burned. What is it about? This is an alabaster bowl in the form of a huge flower of water lily. On the sides are the gods of millions of years, royal names, blessings, wishes. Everything is beautiful and wonderful. In this bowl cone, which is very thin and made of the favourite Egyptian metrovertine, which we call alabaster, a bowl is inserted which is slightly smaller but which exactly repeats this shape. Colour relief is made on the surface of the small bowl, water lily petals and blessings with the names of the king. and there is the palace scene. The king, who is accompanied by the queen, stretches a piece of cloth. At that moment, this is an oil lamp. When an aromatized oil was lit inside, the bowl began to glow, and those images were visible, which were hidden by the thickness of the travertine at that moment, until the bowl was lit. Amazingly beautiful, unique monument from the tomb, which allows you to imagine a night palace with paintings, floors, with glittering gold, and these bowls that stand for the space to be illuminated. Among the things found in Malacca, a huge number of ritual pendants, which traditionally were made in the form of a counterweight. There are two wonderful cats holding a fastener for threads, and the threads are blue-green. This is a ritual pendant of the goddess Cathor. Traditionally, such a necklace was worn and used as a conditional cloth during worship. The priests of the goddess Cathor Nefrut are wonderful, and in order to imagine how such priests looked like, I show you the inscriptions of the tomb of Velimoja Mena, whose two daughters became notable court ladies, notable Nefrut. Look what they have on their heads. They have structures in the form of a royal pool from which golden papyruses rise, stylized with acarina and feathers, and on their foreheads are golden gazelles, which are a distinctive feature of the younger royal couple, and in no case are elements of any dress of the great royal couple, which is a completely different headdress. It is different. In their hands they hold sisters, golden braids with the emblem of the goddess Cathor. Here, on the central girl, here just hangs Mena, only golden. And imagine these beautiful ladies with their eyes closed. And here the curl of her face goes so thin, beautiful. The artist showed it incredibly gracefully. These ladies lived in Malgatia, and here the yard becomes very graceful and very seductive for us. The Egyptians began to drink wine. Beer was a national drink. Wine was exquisite. For the 25th century BC, for the period of the pyramids, there were already 7 classic varieties of wine. Unlike the Greeks, they did not dilute the wine with water. And the wine of the ancient world was all semi-sweet or sweet, because the dry wine was immediately mixed with the vinegar. On the one hand, this wine was used in the temple ritual, and on the other hand, this wine was used for the holiday. Imagine that there in Malgatia, during the holidays of the 30th anniversary of the reign of Amenhotep III, thousands of vessels were found for wine. And these are very important tags on them. That is, it assigns what year of reign, what king, what vineyard, from which part of the country. These are tags that, first of all, preserve the date of all major holidays and events of the era of Amenhotep III. That is, it is a unique historical source. On the other hand, it is also a geography of vineyards, varieties of wine, all the most delicious that was brought to the palace of Pharaohs. Very often these rituals, of course, were associated with the goddess Cador, who was not only the goddess of beauty, love, the ruler of all the mysteries of the female heart. She was also the goddess of intoxication, because intoxication was associated with the pacification of anger, with the acquisition of happiness, joy, and well-being. And here in Malkatia, a unique collection of court vessels was found, which were used during these rich and abundant fairs. They are all made of cobalt, this blue colour, and judging by the abundance in which these vessels were found only in the palaces, even at one time in Egyptology, they were called so-called court ceramics, court vessels. I will now show you some of these wonderful objects. First of all, large wine vessels with the mask of the goddess Cador. The decoration of the body imitates the garlands of the petals of the water lilies, which seem to be tied together. And there, between the mask of the goddess Cador, this is the same object, the museum of the Metropolitan Museum. You see amazing water lilies, which show all the wealth, the triumph of the holiday of the Nile Valley. There are a lot of vessels, again the symbols of the Ankh, and they are anthropomorphic. They hold bouquets of flowers in their hands, and on the hand of this symbol of the Ankh, there is also a mask of the goddess Cador on the sign of the feast. And again, flowers, garlands, that is a complete feeling of the holiday. A fragment of the vessel, the neck of which was decorated with sculptural grape thorns. Unfortunately, the vessel has not been preserved, but I will show you a similar one very soon. Egyptian wine was thick because there was always a high percentage of acidity, and in the end there were gold sieves. And through a gold sieve from such a vessel, wine is poured into a flat cup or into a cup. A flat cup was a more popular way of consuming wine than a cup. How did such flat cups look like? This is absolutely amazing. Metropolitan Museum, a large cup of Malkatep. This is the side of the same object, as it turns out. And here is a completely incredible combination of colours of water lilies. And of course, imagine now refined ladies and gentlemen who sit with these cups and vessels inside that palace. And this is a reconstruction that actually already exists in your consciousness. All this is incredibly beautiful. Among the cobalt ceramics, there were simpler things, but very cute. Look at the wonderful head of the goat, and the body is painted, and the head is sculptural, you see, right? Another round cup decorated with a bloomed flower of a water lily. And in order to understand that there were actually sculptural lids, I will show you as an exception. This is all the Metropolitan Museum. I will show you things from Boston. This is an amphora from Malkatep. And also look at the bull on the lid. Absolutely wonderful. And a goat that sits in the thicket of this reed, and vine twigs hang over it, which are made so sculpturally, amazingly beautiful objects. And so that the entire collection of ceramics is complete, you have simpler vessels, such general consumables. Here is a very light decoration, and here again are the lilies that fly around the thickets of the Nile waters with images of water flowers. Among those plots that appear in the decorative elements of the ceramics, there are a lot of animals. Egyptians loved animals in general. I will show a fragment of such a vessel with a wonderful bull that dances in the swamps of the delta. But animals in these palaces were not only in the images, there were gardens in the palaces. We know a lot about this. And in these gardens there were the first mini prototypes of royal zoos. First, I will show you a very interesting image. This is a piece of relief with an image of a palace in Malkatep. It is stored in Karnak in the open air museum, what we see here. This is a palace structure. There are rooms, some kinds of servants and so on. In the centre there are vineyards. These are vineyards stretched on high fences. Further, a closed room where gazelles live in the garden, gazelles and ibises, herons and other species of birds, springs with favourite fish. This garden, in which the refined courts walked, is a must for every Egyptian creator. We know this from texts and archaeological documents. The very left part of this image is something like a corral. This is a fence inside which there are already agricultural and industrial animals. There are also animals that give milk oil, and everything necessary for well-being in this complex. Among the finds in Malkatep, there are a lot of jewellery, amulets, magical items. This is all logical. On the one hand, in the Metropolitan Museum, on the top left, there is a clay model for casting a phoenix amulet in the form of a god demon. The top row is made of gold and green, a ring with the image of Nibmatra, that is the throne of Nibmatra, a beautiful frog with red eyes. The frog was a symbol of fertility, protection of the house. The figure of a magical frog was necessarily put under the bed in the wife's bedroom. It was associated with the Chadar Rodin. This is a very homely amulet for the bedroom. Traditional alcohol, which is popular in the Egyptian tradition, and a very simple amulet, which is in the centre. In fact, this is an image of the double throne of Chinchat, each of which is hidden under a baldachin. They stand on the sign of an alabaster bowl with such an interesting texture. This is the Hebrew. This is a holiday. Altogether, this is the Hebrew. This is the holiday of the revival of the life forces of the Tsar, which is so much dedicated to historical evidence inside the Malkata. The holiday took place not only in the palace itself. Here's the Malkata on the map of Girkatabu, a huge lake. You see there's an ancient road, and on the one hand you see a red dot which is called Kom El Samak, and at the end Kom El Abd. These are two huge platforms built in the desert, and on these platforms there were special pavilions. You see the reconstruction of Kom El Samak below. There were thrones around the corners of these platforms, and during the ritual, one of the episodes of the ritual is very complex. The ritual was that the Tsar sat down on the central throne, and the main deities of the Nile Valley, who were played by their respective priests, took him inside the family. The priests were specially prepared for this ritual. Kom El Samak's central pavilion was led by a staircase, in the centre of which traditionally in Egyptian architecture there was a rampart. This is his painting. That is, the Tsar walked, as it were, along the arches and captives of the rulers of other states. We would continue to guess how this happened. We would go through the fragments of amphora decorations and think about how it could have been. We have a completely amazing source. The fact is that the Queen Tea had a ruler who managed her household, the great nobleman Pharaoh Senof. He is an extremely revered person, and apparently Pharaoh loved holidays very much. He liked these holidays. He took a lot of part in them, and he orders a decorative program for his tombs, including the images of the great holidays of the third anniversary. I will show them to you mainly in drawings, because the original has been preserved not very well. But the drawing will show you some very important episodes, and at this moment you will finally imagine all the incredible luxury that took place in this palace. The first scene. First, we look to the right. This is a huge kiosk for the holidays of the third anniversary. In the beginning, the king himself, Menhotep III, sits in a special ritual attire. I will not dive into the ritual holiday of the third anniversary now. We are more interested in something else. We are interested in the nobleman's fun around this incredible ceremony. There is no one else sitting behind the king but the goddess Hathor herself. Behind them is the third figure, which is absolutely unprecedented, the Queen Tea, her sculptural image found in the ruins of the temple of the goddess Mut in Karnak on the left. Now, this is the Cairo Museum, a stunning portrait, and she has a crown of morius on her head, in which the names of her husband, Menhotep III, are entwined. and again the stand for the double throne of Chinchat. This is her crown for the holiday of Set, the inscription inside the reliefs of the tomb of Herifa says she is next to His Majesty, like the truth follows after the dawn. We know that this was one of the brightest living stories in the Middle East in the 14th century. We know that she had a personal correspondence with foreign states. We know her image of the same height as her husband, and even here in a purely male royal holiday of Set, the Queen Tea plays a very big role. Let's imagine how it was. There are royal daughters. On their heads are high golden crowns of modius. They are dressed in the finest pressed clothes. In their hands they hold the vessels of Hes and Kiba, in which the purest water is infused on the throne, and they carry this water in the vessels of Hes, Kiba and Nemset. Nemset are such thick teapots. They go in pairs. They carry water to perform the ritual of purification of Menhotep III at the moment when he leaves the palace. For a second, turn on your imagination, because the next scene tells you about the musical order that is present here. Here they beat the castanets, here they play the flutes, here special priests sing, great dancers, acrobats and Bat perform absolutely incredible dances with acrobatic tricks. This is the square in front of the palace in Malkat. Everyone is waiting for the solemn departure of Menhotep III and the beginning of the great ceremony of Hes. There are even sacred animals, beloved animals of the royal family. The whole universe is gathered here, including ambassadors of foreign states, who are necessarily present during the ceremony in order to wait for the king's departure. The following dances: at the top you see the dancers, at the bottom the priests sing and beat off their singing, clapping their hands. There is a lot of sound, music, lyre, harp, plucked strings. All this is incredibly rich and ceremonial. Then the dances continue. At the bottom the priests sing recitatives, specially praising the departure of Menhotep III, and say that he is like a golden and dazzling sun disk at the moment when he leaves the temple. Special priests hold huge drums in which the rhythm of the singing of the temple choir is beaten off, and one of the high priests holds a scepter in his hands, an abba, a scepter, a sign that he has a high priesthood. They call the king to leave the palace. Further, despite all the damage, the scenes are clearly visible. Again the drums, again the temple singing, and here the magic in the masks of the goddess. Here are two figures on which there are now full men. They have magic hands and masks of the god of the devil. They are associated with those magical powers that will be endowed by the purified Menhotep III after the ceremony is completed. The doors of the palace open and a divine procession comes out of them. The high priests go. Their titles are signed above their heads. They bear divine standards with images of various deities, royal insignia. This is a huge series of figures that come out of the open gates in front of the king. Finally, the king himself appears, followed by Queen Thea. Behind the back of Queen Thea, you see the traditional Egyptian art of depicting open doors. These are open doors. They come out and they rejoice. The texts are filled with delight, enthusiasm, with parade epithets. It is quite clear that Mr. Pharaohs, who was one of the organisers of these holidays, wanted to capture the whole amazing atmosphere of those ceremonies and holidays that he managed to do for Menhotep III. There are actually a lot of stories. I will show you a selection. But one of the most beautiful scenes is that we have already imagined that they came out of the palace. visited the platform of Komal Samak. There was a meeting with the gods, and then the courtiers stood at the ends of Lake Birket Abu holding cables. Moreover, the highest ranking noblemen. And with these cables they drove a boat in the form of a boat of the evening sun, on which Menhotep III and Queen Thea stood. This is a million-year-old boat ride along the lake of eternity. I think that here all the other emotions need to be seen and imagined how fantastically beautiful it was. And there are two more scenes, ritual scenes from the holiday. First, the extreme upper left corner, and Menhotep III raises praises and offers a great budget of the priests, a sacred budget in the image of which the god Osiris stands. And here he acts as a source of life, as the head of all living, and is one of those sources of life who give their life through the king to all living. And together with Queen Thea, the upper left middle, Menhotep III raises a huge pillar vertically Jed, a sign of what is eternal. That is, Jed, the truth, will be higher than chaos, and the order will be the order of ignorance. Behind Menhotep III and Thea Nessen Esu, royal children, daughters and sisters go there. I don't like all this beauty. I will say right away that a large part of these scenes was completely vandalised, cut out of the wall and dragged to the European Museum. Pieces from Berlin, pieces from Brussels. That is, people raised their hands with an axe to cut out pieces of these faces and images, from the sad to the fun. Here are the lower three registers. These are not ordinary people. These are courtiers. Here people dance, games on sticks, which have been preserved in the Egyptian tradition when two men imitate such a fight on sticks. In fact, it is a very ancient Egyptian tradition. And look at the boats filled with yaks. That is, everything here is just bursting with luxury. They carry bowls, they carry food, and of course, the honest servant of the king. The hero could not but depict a man who was the head of the house, the great wife of the Tsar who organised the holidays. Unfortunately, his image is very much destroyed. Here is the central figure. This is the hero. But first of all, he is depicted in front of the pedestal on which the royal cheetah sits. The royal cheetah is preserved very well, and below too is the preparation for the incredible holiday that the king made for his loyal servant. In his hands he holds a bowl in the form of a flower of a water lily. From there, lilies and vampires open in the centre of the figure of the king himself. This is a sign of the revival of life and such a goodwill. That is, he wishes this bowl for the sake of the eternal renewal of life. This is such a giant finale, in fact, a series of amazing images. I will show you one fragment of the original so that you understand what kind of work it is. This is all voluminous relief. Moreover, this voluminous relief was painted here on the figure of Menhotep III, where his blankets were painted. And now imagine that in the light of the candlesticks, in the part of the tomb that was accessible to visitors, this is an incredible story about the great royal holiday in Malkat. It was told in great detail, amazingly exquisite. At the end of his life, Menhotep III revered himself. He was one of those kings who revered and loved self-devotion. In the Luxor temple, which was built for him and for his vital forces, once there was this cult statue which depicts his deprived age, deprived even of some portrait similarity, but the candlesticks on which this quartz colossus stands, if you look at them from the side, this hieroglyph of Temu, the god of Atum, it appears here as a cult image of the god of the evening sun. In fact, the monument that is now in the Luxor Museum of Egyptian Art is not transmitted by any photo. The fact is that quartz is not always perfectly polished here, and a large part of the monuments sparkles when you look at it. And this one, as he called himself, his favourite epithet is Etan Shahinet, a blinding sun disk. This blindness was also transmitted by the symbolism of quartz, which was originally considered a sun material in Egypt, but also by sparks on the statue in the area of bracelets and earrings. That is, in part, all the decorations on this monument were not exposed. Therefore, now friends, we will return to the ruins of Malkatha, and already knowing everything that we have been discussing with you for the last half hour, we must now imagine how important the work of archaeologists is, how important the knowledge is in order to come to these ruins. Imagine and understand what was happening here in the 14th century BC, when it was one of the main palaces of Egypt. We are moving with you to the north of Akhetaton, Amarna, the capital of the son of Amenhotep III, the rightful reformer of Amenhotep IV, who changes his name to Enaton, his wife Nefertiti. You know very well, I will not tell you about the history of the religious reform of Enaton. This is a completely different story. We see aerial photography. This is the central part of the city that was called in ancient times Akhetaton, the garrison of the sun disk. Our task is to see the palace of Enaton and the Queen Nefertiti, which is also a lot. The black line, the torn one, which is at the bottom of the frame, these are green fields. These are cultivated lands that occupy more than half of the central palace complex. It was simply ploughed in the Middle Ages into the fields. In the centre of the city, you can see the Zer ceremonial road. The palace in its central part was thrown over the road. Above the road, there was a special huge bridge. On the bridge, there was a window of apparition. This is a very important part of the Egyptian palace complex. This is the window on the balcony in which the king appeared in front of his subjects. It was a unique opportunity to see the living king. Let's see what was here in Enaton in the 14th century BC. In a nutshell, a little about the city itself. It is built on the eastern bank of the Nile, parallel to the river. Here was the Great Palace under the sign of the Great Palace. The Great Ceremonial Road. In the far eastern wadi, on the edge of the wadi, is the riverbed. On the Arabian side was the royal tomb, and the whole city resembled the structure of the god Aton, who was depicted in the form of the sun with many hands of rays. In the area of the royal wadi in the east, the sun rose, and the entire territory of the city was clearly limited, and it ended with huge steles depicting Enaton and Nefertiti, in which the city was described. Each such stele was like a fingerprint of the hand of the god Aton, who closed the territory of his city, which was dedicated to him. 17 years of the rule of Enaton, then he was cursed. The reforms closed. Egypt returned to the traditional cults of the gods of their culture. The city has survived thanks to this, not bad. The main problem of the Egyptian cities in the narrow valley of the Nile is that the subsequent epoch builds something on top of the existing monuments. Due to the fact that the land of Amarna was cursed, no one built anything there. On the one hand, the preservation is not very impressive. This is the small temple of the god Aton in Amarna. The columns, of course, have already been restored, but the structure of the city, the meaning of all the rooms, the logic, all this is well preserved. I will show you a few shots of the wonderful scientific project Amarna 3D, which, based on very accurate archaeological materials, will allow you for a second to imagine what the City of the Sun looked like. This is the pier in the area of the modern archaeological zone of El Hakanville and the river temple of Enaton, which has practically not survived. This is where the gates of the City of the Sun are located. This is how it all looked. The area framed by a red rectangle is the area of the palace complex, which will be especially important to us now. There is the palace, and you can see now that above the central road there is a bridge, inside which there is a window of phenomena, about which I told you. This is also clearly visible on the plan. You see two parts of the royal residence, which the bridge connects. This is how it looked in ancient times. And now for a second, let's look at the drawings and the preserved tombs of the Amarna nobles in order to imagine how it was. In the window is a pillow, Enaton and Nefertiti. Above them is a burning sun disk, Bohaton. Next to the palace complex are the royal daughters, the royal sisters, and there in front the nobles turn to the king. The king stretches out his hand forward in the traditional gesture of speech, and there in fact the nobleman stands in front of him, who is being honoured at this moment. Appearing in the window of the phenomenon, the king and the queen take gold jewellery, necklaces, some expensive gifts, and at the moment of awarding the nobleman, he can throw all this gold. Special servants catch the gold, see it on the ice and put it on the nobleman. And then it's such an incredible honouring. Or in the window of the phenomenon, the king and the queen appear during the announcement of some major decrees, during communication with the court. This is such a zone, thanks to which the sacred space of the palace becomes at least partially accessible for the court. The back part, there you see the Great Royal Road, there is the residence, and the last frame from what can be found on the internet, on their wonderful website, Amarna 3D. Here's the sunset, the river palace of Akhenaton Nefertiti on the banks of the Nile. Closed for the rest of the people. There were special enclosures where they watched the sunset. That is, there was a dinner of the royal family. That is, it was such a summer dacha, isolated from the central part of the capital itself. Let's go back to the palace. Here it is where it says Great Palace. Here is the bridge with the window of Yavlenia. Here is the second part of the residence. We will forget about the rest of the city and turn to what is left of the palace. Parade entrance and inside as structures associated with the receptions of the nobles and foreign ambassadors, as of course a large women's house. This part, a long white rectangle with an open space for a garden, is a women's house. It never resembled in Egypt any gourmet complex of Topkapi number. Each woman had her own residence, but they often united by the private space of the garden. In the centre of the garden, there was some kind of pond. They lived very well by the standards of the ancient East. All this was richly painted, decorated, and incredibly graceful. Here is a part of the residence, a large hall for receptions, separate structures where there was a storage and a water source, a pond on top, traditional rooms of the Tsar's bedrooms, and those rooms where the courtiers lived. Several hundred people live here. There's a huge complex of services that should ensure the life of the Tsar. All this is incredibly beautiful. I will try to prove it to you. This is how the central columns of the reception hall in Akhetattonic look like. They were decorated not only with the names of the Tsar, but also with images of such crazy flying birds with flowers. And now a very important thing. I will not accidentally show you the beauty of Kapetev. This is not a painting. Wooden columns were encrusted with half-precious stones, glass, gold, silver and electrum. This is all encrusted space. Moreover, the wall paintings were also encrusted. For example, the image of the Queen. The face is made of faience to make it voluminous. Or, for example, the brook runs along the thickets of the coastal low flora. All the flowers are voluminous. Due to the combination of voluminous incrustations and paintings, such a 3D illusion was created. A voluminous illusion of this being in a happy world, which does not know death, which does not know grief. Because the Egyptian paradise is also a field of green reeds where eternal sun and eternal happiness, and the Egyptian palace is an attempt to depict this incredible full sun and paradise on earth. Another theme which is present here in the palace on the wall paintings. Here is a fragment of this room. These are absolutely household things, not at all associated with Egyptian art. A servant runs, carries food, prepares for the arrival of the king, and the broom is swept by the floor. This is a broom sweeping the floor in front of the palace. That is, there is an absolutely wonderful living household life of this palace. And there, all this is subordinated to one clear idea, the happiness of vanity, because now the king and queen will come. And due to the fact that in the painting the king and queen are beloved, vanity is pleasant. Now they will come and the holiday will begin. And of course, these images, like nothing else, introduce us to this absolutely living atmosphere of royal presence. The most amazing part of the palace in Amarna is the floors. I'll show you a drawing first. This is the hall in the northern part of the women's house of the palace in Amarna. In the centre there is a huge pond, waters depicted, water flowers, ducks are swimming, water lilies are blooming, fish are swimming. And in the round part, this image is the base of the columns. As you understand, this is a view from above. On the perimeter there are incredible thickets of trees. Ducks fly out of them, bulls run. That is such a crazy triumph of the Nile Valley. On the perimeter there are gifts. Everything is delicious and beautiful. And finally, in the left part, here is a passage, again a carpet path, as I jokingly call it, in the form of 9 archers and tribesmen. When in 1891 to 1894, the great father of British archaeology, William Matthew Brynders Petrie, found this palace. The floors were completely preserved, and this is a frame from the meeting of the Egyptian Exploration Society. Petrie asked to build above the floors a special roof. Everything was surrounded by walls, and here was made such a special path so that visitors could enter and see what the floors looked like. The preservation is incredible for the 14th century. They walked on these floors. They did not want to walk on their feet, and everything was fine. But among the locals, there was a legend that treasures were hidden. In 1912, the locals broke the floors and dug holes in the floors to find something there. And there were no treasures there, moreover, according to logic. They could not be here. As a result, the broken fragments were transported to Cairo. They were very well restored. And in the centre of the atrium of the Cairo Museum, under the glass, these floors of the Northern Women's House in Amani are recreated. It must be seen. Of course, and it would be even better if there were no cracks, but this is the fantastic work of the master. How free the stroke is, how wide the movement is, how sincerely this incredible triumph of nature is conveyed. And what a rush of colour, blue, terracotta, green. This fragment was brought to the Berlin Museum in 1912, and this fragment from the floors in the Cairo Museum. The fact is that in the Cairo Museum, the atrium is generally dark. It is covered with a complex structure of wooden slats and glass, but not very new. It is almost impossible to remove the floors normally. Let's hope that in the new Great Museum in Giza, they will be presented with dignity, because you must agree this is a great masterpiece. And now another small detail. The floors are covered with a layer of varnish made from the resin of a cedar tree. It is absolutely incredible, because if you walked on them, the painting would not have lasted a year of use. And this is the 14th century. On the wall of one of the rooms of the large royal palace in Amarna, there is a unique image of the royal family. This large white figure is Nefertiti, who sits on a flower pillow. These are her legs. In front of her is the leg of Akhenaton. Between them there are 3 girls, 3 tortured princesses. On the pillow, which is a coloured pillow with blue geometric ornaments, there are 2 babies, 2 younger daughters, and one takes the pillow gently behind the chin. The upper part, the upper illustration, shows you the ratio of the human figure. This is Petri himself who found this painting. Here is the lower part of the register, the lower register of the painting of the palace. These are hieroglyphic plants. And then there was a huge scene from the life of the royal family. This scene Petri very carefully layered from the wall. It is now stored in Oxford in the Ashmole Museum. This is one of the most important Amarnan monuments. In addition, in other rooms in the temples of Akhenaton, there were many images of the palace scenes. Now I will show you just a few. This is the window of the phenomenon of the Amarnan Royal Palace. The relief, which is now stored in Boston in the Museum of Fine Arts, the hustle and bustle of the courtyards. This is the kitchen. He cooks food, and there you see separate rooms, and the upper part is the royal bedroom, and this rectangle with the pool is the royal bath. This is the bathroom. We'll talk about this a little later. And I really like this relief. I show it in the progression. This is the tomb of Aegea, the father of Queen Nefertiti. This is the royal bedroom. And there are very interesting things here. The royal bedroom itself with a baldachin is in the right part. Here is the zone, look, 3 rooms which are separated by a corridor, and there the court cooks food, and here the kitchen is served, and the zone on the left is very interesting. There are 2 halls where women and musicians sit. This is what in the Egyptian language was called Kener, a closed zone, a forbidden place. Now, this is close to the idea of Ogarim, but still there is a difference. The inhabitants of Kener could leave the palace and engage in some private life. But here is a storage room, a huge number of harps, zither, cymbals, various musical instruments. This is a musical group of luxurious women who not only played but also sang, because traditionally Hesed court musicians, they sing beautifully. These are the ladies who played in the royal chambers of Kener. This is a unique image. Nothing like this is preserved in Egyptian art. Let's understand that all are living people, and we must understand that the palace has all the amenities. I will show you a wonderful thing. This is the main item of the toilet of the Amun Royal Palace. Agree, everything is very civilized. Here is a chandelier, here is a comfortable seat. It stood over the mine, which was filled with sand. This is how it happens in modern traditional Egypt. One of the magnificent Amun residences, about which I cannot say a few words. was located in the south of the capital. This is the Great Marwaton. This is the area where the Queen of Kiev lived, the second wife of Akhenaton, who was very beloved to her. Here, in the centre of her residence, I will show you all the stages. There is a huge lake around the kiosk. The palace next to the palace was an amazing garden. This is a southern residence, even a southern garden, inside which there were beautiful kiosk structures. Let's look at the architectural reconstruction. Here's the entrance to Marwaton, and here is the reconstruction. Lake, boat, exotic plants, exotic animals. From the Berlin Museum, here is a portrait of the Queen of Kiev in characteristic round earrings. They distinguish her very well. Apparently she was of foreign origin. This is also a Mathanian princess, Tuduhepa, who came to Egypt in the last years of Atep III's life and became the beloved woman of his son Akhenaton, having received the name Kiev. Translated from ancient Egyptian, it means a little monkey, such a baby monkey, a very affectionate, very kind name. She belonged to the southern residence, Maruaton. The main residence of Queen Nefertiti is the northern palace. By the way, Nefertiti loved animals very much, because at the northern palace in Akhenaton was found a huge zoo where there were gazelles and some aquatic animals. That is, it is larger than other court and usually palace rooms associated with animals. But the interesting thing here is different. In the green rooms of the northern palace, this is the resting place of Queen Nefertiti. At the beginning of the 20th century, there are surprisingly painted compositions that allow us to imagine what the interior looked like when the Queen was resting. In this frame, you can see an image of the original foundation from the brick of the heart. This is now. We come and look at the brick of the heart. This is the palace. Yes, this is the palace, because the brick of the heart was not visible in antiquity. And probably the most incredible thing, which is connected with the northern palace of Amarna, is the room of Zemorotka, the amazing work of the great artist and Egyptologist Nina de Gindis Davis, who collected all the preserved fragments and made a work of art. She put together a scene of Zemorotka falling into the Nile, and of course the profile of Queen Nefertiti, because she was an incredibly beautiful woman who was the main hostess of the great northern palace of Amarna. And in order to raise the veil over private life, I will show on the one hand the relief of the tomb of Nelira, Queen Nefertiti, through Sikichka. She pours wine into the bowl of Akhenaten, who sits on the throne. Next to her are three daughters, one next to her father, the second carries delicious bread, the third goes with bouquets. Below, if you pay attention, there is a painting of a servant and a henar. These are artists, that is, everything here is filled with music, and the fantastic beauty of the cups in the form of a white water lily with the names of Akhenaten and Nefertiti from the collection of the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Slowly leaving Amarna, I once again remember that these palaces were especially rich with gardens. It is clear that now we find the roots. They are well preserved in the Mediterranean. We know well what plants were in the garden. Sometimes it's completely unexpected to mention that the Egyptians loved poppies, daisies, apricots, margaritas, and the lotus, the pink lotus. Nelumba was not in Egypt before the Persian invasion, before the 5th century BC. The Egyptian lotus is a water lily, white and blue. It is not a fairy. Nelumba was brought only by the Persian troops. Therefore, these are the water flowers and two scenes from the garden. Tutankhamun with his wife, the roof of the palace made of plainer bone. This is the famous Mandragora garden. She gives him bouquets, and mandragora flower beds surround this space. Cairo Egyptian Museum, and a wonderful, absolutely trepidant work of art, the collection of the Louvre. Nefertiti's daughter Small collects grape thorns, also mandragora, next to her in the palace garden. These are the scenes that allow you to imagine how it looks. I will take a little more of your time to show very briefly, but necessary for the space of the Egyptian palace to be accessible to you, a few more complexes. We are moving to the north of Egypt, to the northeast of the delta, approximately where Kuta Hutu Aret, Avaris, the capital of Gexos, Ramses the Great, his father Seti I, builds there a new city, the huge capital of Ramses Onak II, the house of Ramses and the great victories. This is approximately the modern archaeological zone of Kantir, the triumphal statue of Ramses the Great and the Turin Museum. This is the delta. This is the place where Egypt becomes flat as a table, incredibly green and fertile, and the screen cover is everywhere broken by many streams and River Anna branches through which the Nile waters slowly fall into the Mediterranean Sea. A completely different Egypt. Unusual. The fact is that the delta is inhabited, and very quickly the area of these cities again was ploughed into the fields. You go to Kantir in the fields, and there are the feet of the Colossus of Ramses the Great, no more, no less. They, of course, are now under protection. That is, they are on the account. The locals do not touch them. But it was here that there was once a grandiose capital, and Pharaohs Ramses did not survive well, because in the 10th century BC, the Pharaohs of another dynasty, the 21st, built a neighbouring capital, the city of Tanis, and moved to the new capital as part of the monuments of the city. And these huge statues of Ramses the Great are the territory of Tanis. They are all moved to Tanis from Pharaohs Ramses. Pharaohs Ramses was an incredibly beautiful city, judging by the data given by archaeologists. It was a city on the islands. Unexpected for Egypt. Today, I think many people who love Egyptian art are very surprised. We have Jean-Claude Gelvin again. This is a reconstruction of the central zone of Pharaohs Ramses. This is the central island of the royal residence. And in order for us to enjoy not only the artist's view, but to come to absolute scientific data, here are the data of the geomagnetic study of the central island, in the centre of which there was a lake, and here are the palaces and huge temples. Studies are carried out here by Austrian and German specialists for many years. And you see how difficult it is in the Nile Channel, which goes here to the Eastern Channel, to find traces of the city of Ramses. This geomagnetic survey at the top, at the bottom, is a reconstruction of what was here. Huge temples, and not only the temples of the Egyptian gods, but also the Asian gods, which at this time include the Egyptian pantheon. And the upper right corner of the frame is a stela with the image of Seth, the great ruler of the desert and patron of the alien lands in the Egyptian pantheon, and such a beautiful three-dimensional goddess. In fact, this is the Phoenician goddess Ashtaret, which Ramses brings gifts. This is the city of the Colossi, and the Colossi had their own names and cult names. And on the stela of General Ness, which is now kept in the Römer Museum and in Hildesheim, you can see Ramses kneeling on his own Colossus and awarding General Ness with golden gifts, with the cries and joy of the crowd. This is an analogy to a phenomenon. And again, here's the window of a phenomenon through which General Ness awards Ramses. This is the royal stable, because this is the era of brilliant wars. And Ramses, when he hardly left the field of the great Kadesh battle, where he fought with the Hittite kingdom for many years, he was taken out by horses. He even had a ring with horses. It is kept in Louvre. He loved horses very much. What you see below is the house of horses, I can't say it differently, in the first Ramses. Each horse has its own entrance. It's all incredibly beautiful and richly decorated with all possible materials. This is the stable of Ramses, a unique frame of the German reconstruction. And this is the central alley from the processional church in the first Ramses, as it was once. But we are interested in another thing. We are interested in several tiny but very important which remained from the house of Ramses, from his creator. The palace rose up to a higher place. It was incredibly richly decorated with plants. This is just some kind of blinding space of plants. All the walls, floors, all the elements of the decor, all this was decorated with glazed faience. Here the platform has survived. I show the drawing. It is not exhibited. It is stored in the basements of the Cairo Museum. This is the platform of the throne of Ramses the Great in the first Ramses. Huge figures of lions devouring prisoners. The height is about 90 centimetres, and all this is decorated with glazed shiny tiles. For example, here are the fragments of such a platform in the Metropolitan Museum. These are Nubians and Syrians who worship the king. Imagine that we have a platform of the golden throne of Ramses the Great. The sculpture gives us the opportunity to imagine. And in this hall, the royal throne, there is a door. Imagine a door that completely consists of glazed blue-green tiles that decorate the doorway of the wall of the golden tiles. Yes, the tiles were torn. Some of them remained. The faience tiles remained, with the names of Ramses himself and his father. That is, there are such rows of green frames on the golden wall. The floors of the hall adjacent to the bedroom of Ramses. Faience tiles with fish or with birds. That is, we now very well reconstruct such things, recalling the floors of the royal palace. And finally, the royal bedroom, from which, of course, only the foundations remained. But on the walls of the royal bedroom, a huge figure of the god of the devil biting the serpent's knight was depicted. This is a reconstruction of the bedroom of Ramses. The bedroom in Malkat looked, and this is a genuine faience fragment of the serpent's knight. And then, quite beautifully, above the royal bed, there's such a strange round fragment. In the royal bedrooms, they calculated the orientation to the north. A special air intake was raised to the north in order for the north wind to blow over the royal bed. That is, this is an air intake in order for, in addition to the apokal, such a favourable north wind, which also had a symbolic meaning of eternal life in ancient Egypt, to be present here. At the son of Ramses the Great at Merneptah, a small but very interesting residence is built in Memphis. We'll look there for a minute. 1914. This is how the palace of Merneptah, who was in Memphis, who loves Egypt. The blue circle is the lying colossus of Ramses the Great. The red rectangle is Komkala. This is the former palace of Merneptah. This is the archaeological zone. How did it look in antiquity? Everything red is a brick, everything white is limestone. The entrance hall, the waiting room, the small waiting room is already covered. The room with 6 columns is the room of the royal reception with a throne, and a rear room is the royal bedroom. The yard at that time was in the north, in the first session. This is a residence for short visits to the palace of Merneptah in Memphis. The palace was preserved very well and was not rebuilt because one day, perhaps at the end of the reign of Merneptah, it burned down. It was simply covered with sand, and so this palace was left. The Museum of the University of Pennsylvania took out everything. Moreover, they did not have enough ceiling height in the museum. They cut the columns in half and put them in halves. The columns are gigantic. In the centre of the Sphinx, which you already know, around the door, windows, an incredible programme, and what a beauty on the capitals. This is a genuine painting of the 13th century BC. In order for you to get an idea of this palace, I will show you several items. In addition to this amazing capitals, walls with the triumphant images of Merneptah, which beats the enemies, the windows of the royal palace, which were closed with ceilings, stone windows through which the air passed, the light passed. They were inserted into the upper part of the walls. This is what the 12-metre doors that led to the palace looked like. They were cut into pieces in Pennsylvania because the height of the ceiling in the museum was not enough. And this is how the main Sphinx stood under the snow in the 1920s, until finally in the 1950s they did not understand what they were doing and did not move it to the museum. Of course, we are terrified now, but we still do not understand what we are doing with the Sphinx in Manhattan and St. Petersburg. We did not go far, unfortunately. But this is a sad story. Only in Pennsylvania, outside of Egypt, you can see what the royal palace looked like. This is its reconstruction. This is the throne room of the residence of Ramses III in his palace in Komkala. Here you see the podium on which the royal throne stood. At the end of our story, we will return to Seva. There is Memphis, the palace of the peacock. In Seva, in the temples on the west bank of the Nile, there were always small palace complexes. These are the residences where the king stayed for a short time while he was in the temple. During Ramses III and Medinet Abu, in the south of Seva, a grandiose temple is being built, which was for a long time surrounded by the West Bank. The time was restless, so the temple and palace complex looked like a fortress. If we look at the aerial photograph, this is how it looks now. The central fortification, the tower, is built in the Syriac style, and next to the central part of the temple, everything that remained of the palace complex. Nevertheless, there is a lot of material, and there is an opportunity to imagine how it looked. First, a simple structure. It opened to the right with a beautiful portico, the hall of services, the central column hall where the royal throne was located, and next to it, the royal bedroom, different rooms. There was this image on the central door of the palace. In fact, it shows a reconstruction, but it has been preserved well. The royal skinks keep the space of the sacred zone where His Majesty resides. This is the window of events, decorated with the heads of the enslaved peoples, all the conquered lands. The king himself opposes the enemy. All this was richly painted. This is the main hall. The columns were also encrusted with faience, precious stones, gold, silver, electrum. A large number of fragments have been preserved, and the reconstruction is very accurate. There, in the next hall, you see the double false doors where the golden throne and the pedestal were located. The palace is chambered for its time, but incredibly beautiful. Richly decorated columns, white clean walls, but all the doorways are decorated with glazed faience, tiles that have preserved their natural colour. These are the enslaved peoples. These are the faience tiles with the palace of Caesar III. These are the royal windows and the royal shower. This is the shower room of Caesar III, the central pool where the servants poured a stream of water through a special hole on top of it. That is, there was a shower. The shower flows into that pit where in large amounts of sand, and accordingly the water through the sewage, made from vessels with recesses inserted into each other, leaves the palace. The same sewage was in the palace of Francis II. There, in the same way, water also flowed into the palace, because due to the fact that the soil in the delta is avy, the water there is not good. Clean water was mined at great depths. Thus, the system of anti-colonization was that the walls of the palace shower were constantly whitewashed. That is, it was a dazzlingly white space, and only at the top there was a frieze of protective symbols, because the king was naked there, and accordingly the protective symbols had to prevent him from any trouble. Alas, but it was here in the ice chamber of the palace complex that the main trouble with Raphael III did not happen. He had a very difficult relationship with the women of his house. At the Cossack Colossi, this is one of the courtyards of the Temple of the Unification of Taboo, have many images of the Queen, and all of them are amazingly nameless. He did not even mention the names of those women who were next to him. As a result, the main megadole, this is the entrance to the territory of the complex on the second and third floors of the tower, where there was a harem, conditional harem, women's training. It was there that one of the most famous conspiracies in the history of ancient Egypt took place. Let's look at two images. Below is a photo. Ramses III is sitting on the throne. This is how these rooms are decorated. Some kind of fruit or flower is drawn on a spoon. He plays with spoons and a chessboard, of course. Egyptian. Here are the ladies with the Apocrypha. All this would be very beautiful if not for one story. This is a Turin legal papyrus that tells how Ramses III people were brought for serious crimes committed and placed in the interrogation room in front of the great hall of the interrogation for interrogation by the chief of such and such, serious criminal Paibaki Kamen, who was the head of the palace. He was brought for the conspiracy that he made together with the capital and the women of Gorma. He united with them. He began to convey their speeches in it to their mothers, brothers and sisters, saying, "Worry people, raise indignation to do evil against their leader." He was presented to the great noblemen of the interrogation room. They examined his crimes. They found that he told them. His crimes seized him. The nobleman who interrogated him gave him a punishment to punish him. Serious criminal Mesetsura, who was a nobleman, he was brought for the conspiracy that he made together with Paibaki Kamen, who was the head of the palace, and with the women to raise indignation to do evil against their leader. He was presented to the great noblemen of the interrogation room. They examined his crimes. They found him guilty. They gave him a punishment to punish him, like 38 times. And Mesetsura is a name which is translated as "heaven hates him." In the sentence, they could not write a fake name, including the name of God as it was. He was Nerera. Heaven loves him. In the sentence against the Tsar, he became all evil whom it hates. As a result, the point was that one of the wives of the Tsar, the Queen Tea, made a conspiracy against her husband to kill him and put on the throne her own son Pintor, who was not her son's heir. More than 30 people, including the noblemen and the guards of the palace, joined the great noblemen who offered anything for joining the conspiracy. As a result, the special interest for everyone will be how the Tsar was first tried to be killed. He began to make magic scrolls for obstruction and intimidation. He began to kill gods and people from wax to weaken human bodies. He gave them the hands of Pai, the god of fire, whom he had previously made the ruler of the palace, and other serious criminals, saying, "Take them." And they took them. Now, when he was caught in the evil that he had done, and in which he had previously given him superiority, he was interrogated. He was found guilty of all the evil that his heart had conceived. Indeed, he did all this together with other serious criminals. And when Pen-Hirabin, a former watcher of the royal herd, told him, "Give me scrolls to give me strength and power," he gave him a magic scroll of the great prince, and he began to perform magical actions on people. He came to the wall of the woman's house, a remote, empty place. He began to make people out of wax with inscriptions so that they would be carried inside the ruler Arim, obstructing one movement and chanting others. Now, when he was interrogated, he was found guilty of all the crimes and all the evil that his heart had conceived. Indeed, he did all this together with other serious criminals. Disgusting. They are millions of gods and millions of gods. Yes, the conspiracy was revealed, and apparently the first witchcraft did not work. Some of the conspirators were executed. Some were sent together with the court ladies to the golden priests. And the texts of the Turin legal papyrus, which is now in front of you, are very funny and strange. The main queen of the heart of the conspiracy, her son, speaks the truth. They were left alone with themselves, and if it were not for one random find, no one would know what happened to them. This is the nameless Prince Yen from the meeting of the Cairo Council. In 2010, a DNA test was done. This is the son of Ramses III. He was first put on the floor, quickly removed, wrapped in raw lamb skin, sprinkled with balsamic agents, tied up and thrown into a living sarcophagus. The Egyptian climate preserved the body, although it was not balsamized. The body of Queen Tina was not found, but it was clear that fate was waiting for him. With the study of the prince's mind, Zaki Kabas and the outstanding Egyptian researcher, the anthropologist Sahat Salim, found the following. He was 20 years old. He was very tall, very smart, young man with his own luxurious hair, which were braided like dreadlocks with golden, massive earrings. He was a very refined prince who had a terrible fate, but at the same time, the sarcophagus was nameless. They remembered who was there, and when the great pharaohs were reburied, they put this royal, nameless criminal in one of the royal caches, where he was found in 1881. Ramses III himself very quickly left his tomb in the Valley of the Kings. In such a luxurious cover, this is the cover of his sarcophagus. Now it is kept in the Museum of Fitzwilliam in Cambridge. The bottom of the sarcophagus is made of granite. This mummy was kept in the Louvre. The mummy was also found in one of the royal caches. It was always believed that either it was made of sorcery, or due to the fact that a couple of times the text of the papyrus riffle, which is also related to this case, humiliating them that they are the children of snakes. It was the beginning of another. Once in Memphis, King Tutmos I, the father of Hatshepsut, in the 16th century BC, built a palace. The palace was very beautiful. It stood on a platform. It is described in a lot of texts. Then, during the first set, the palace was rebuilt. On the surface of this palace, another was built. Then, in the 6th century BC, the king of the 26th dynasty, he built a huge palace on a huge 13-meter platform, as I promised. This is a hill on which there are now gigantic capitals of palm-shaped columns. This is all that remained of the large royal reception hall. And when you look at this last palace, which we will see today, here it is, a grey platform, 13 metres, a huge ramp, a gate, the palace complex itself, which I will not disassemble. It is already clear. It is a typical ancient Egyptian palace. Then there, in a red rectangle, there are massive second gates. On these gates, the register of the King of April was depicted during the holiday of Siba. During the holiday, which was once told by Hercules and Noah, which was held in the first courtyard of the Pyramid of Zeus. And here, as impossible, probably more convincingly, was shown by the fate of the history of Egyptian inheritance. Because, on the one hand, it was a sad story. One part of the gates, which is behind this Metropolitan Museum, the central part of the gates, the new kebab in the Bible in Copenhagen, the history of the Egyptian palace is the history of great lost treasures. And on the other hand, here, as impossible otherwise, as impossible better, the incredible continuity of these palaces is shown, in each of which there lived a new figure of the great golden horn, the great heavenly horn. Because if you enter the territory of this palace, under which the palace of Seti I, under which the palace of Thutmose I, and under which perhaps an even more ancient palace, they never followed each other because it was necessary to destroy what was left. And look through the windows of the palace bedroom, which was once known, then you will see the entire panorama of Memphis and the pyramid of Djoser, the very first Egyptian pyramid with which our history began, and with which, probably as impossible better, is shown the incredible continuity of centuries, millennia, through which different kings, different fates, different residences, I hope, showed you today what a simple, luxurious, graceful, and sometimes gloomy place was the great house